Booze.
All right, let's get into it. We got Kevin Smith back on here. He is down here hanging out for a few hours in between dropping your kids off. All not necessary for this podcast to talk about, but what do we got going on here? So we got snowbirds this weekend, and I wanted to talk to you a little bit about class racing because I feel like your car would be a good car to like try to fit into Ultra Street or something. Soccer mom.
Yeah.
What kind of what do you avoid from class racing? Why do you not get into that?
Well, we did the class racing thing years ago with my buddy Will Stevenson, who is also a partner in Soccer Mom. And, you had Lyle on here recently. Lyle's got a podcast, which I think you talked about. And
Shake and Bake.
With Stevie Fast, like we and Will won the first ever of the big drag radial races down here at Bradenton, 2008. And, Stevie brought it up on his podcast, and we were like, oh, sweet. Like, we're still something. Like, it was really cool to share that around with Will. But we did the class racing thing, and especially, like, Outlaw Drag Radial turned into Limited Drag Radial.
And we're talking, like, 2007, 8?
So 8 was the first year, and Will was in the game, I would guess, 2000. So he won several of the big Donald Long, Duck X Productions, between South Georgia and Bradenton. We won several of them together as a team, and it got to be where.
What car was that with?
So it was a third gen Camaro. It was kind of copper color with silver stripes. I can send you a picture if you want to drop in.
I can try to
drop it in on the thing, but.
Third gen. Yep.
Yeah, it had a Steve Morris 615-inch big chief-headed big block with a Pro Charger 136. Like, for years, Will was Steve's fastest customer. Like, back 10 years ago, where he went a best of 418 at 182 in the 8th mile. And this was at 3,200 pounds, I think, was his weight for Outlaw Drag Radial.
I mean, that's flying.
It was quick.
Yeah.
Like, we were the event before he sold the car, we were number one qualifier and went all the way to the finals and broke the blower belt in the finals. Like, it had a reverse Pro Charger on it with a big wide 14 millimeter cog tooth belt.
And it was a belt driven Pro Charger as well, which is not common in that racing anyways.
Well,
normally
back then the gear drives weren't super reliable. Like, you have guys, actually Stevie Fast had a Pro Charger on his orange Fox Body Mustang. And back years ago, he actually credited Will with his move into the big block Pro Charge stuff, because he used to be a big block nitrous guy. And I think for the people moving from nitrous, Pro Charger is kind of the next step, because you don't have all of the Pro Charger or any kind of centrifugal supercharger. You don't have all of the intricacies that you have to deal with a turbo car. With a turbo car, well, let me back up. With a Pro Charge car or any kind of supercharged car, you knock 10 degrees of timing out of the thing, you're only killing horsepower. Well, with a turbo car, you knock 10 degrees of timing out of it. Well, you just put a whole bunch of energy into the exhaust side. So now it's making more boost, even though you're trying to pull timing out of it. Now, if you pull enough timing out of it, you're constantly chasing around what the turbo car wants in class racing to keep it where it's happy. And I think the Pro Mod guys deal with that some and all of their stuff. But
I feel like going from nitrous to blower also is nice, because you're not changing exhaust very much. You're not changing the car a lot. The motors are pretty similar. A nitrous motor from a blower combo isn't insanely different, where turbo cars are kind of a different swing altogether on compression and piston stuff.
I don't know all
some
the
stuff. Me and Joe
stuff?
talked about a little bit. Joe Fast Forward, because he was kind of explaining why people do that logical step of nitrous, Pro Charger,
makes
turbo.
Sense. Yep.
And then they always end up on turbo because, as your shirts say,
everything needs a turbo.
Everything does need a turbo.
Yep. And the nice thing about a Pro Charge car, you just roll in, turn on both bulbs, stab it to the floor, and let go of the button. And back with Will's car, our whole power management was just the timing table. So we'd roll up there, and this was on the old 315 street car drag, or it was called a drag radial, but it had way more grooves in it than the Pro 315 has now. And he'd let go of the button, the thing would yank 25 degrees of timing out of it, and then we'd ramp that timing back in over the first 1.5 to 2 seconds. And then from there, it was just everything she had to the finish line.
What did that thing have in it for ECU then?
That was on a Big Stuff 3.
So
Big Stuff was doing the fueling, and MSD, like we had a digital 7 running the ignition. So it was a distributor, single crank trigger on the front, single coil, like old school stuff.
Yeah, so it didn't even have like coils or anything like that. It was just like
ran on Q16 fuel. Like we never went the alcohol
spark
thing.
spider, as they call it.
Yeah. Yep. The forget what Vice Grip Derek calls them, but the lightning hoses and all that stuff, all those running everywhere, all over the motor.
I'm on the younger side, so I've never even touched a distributor. I've never popped one of those things open and had to mess with it. I think the only time I ever messed with it was when they failed a couple times on. The only time I ever really saw one was failures, and Mullet, or we were working with the one on the burnout car.
Okay.
And that was pretty much the closest thing to it, but it was just a Holly trying to read it.
Yep.
And I don't think that ever really worked.
No, it didn't run great. Like the bad thing about the dual sync distributors, they're great for streetcar stuff and getting a crank signal and a cam signal, but you're dealing with a wheel that's, that big around. And so it's a much finer, I think, sensor point to where if you put the big wheel on it, like, your crankshaft wheel for a factory LS is that big. And then the similar dimension for like a crank trigger or something like that. So you're getting way more distance between when the crankshaft sensor sees the next like trigger wheel or trigger tooth or something on the.
So like instead of like a 52 tooth like on LS,
58, yeah,
58, yeah, you're getting a little bit tighter, and then okay, yeah. So it's
well, you think about you're trying to read an 8-tooth magnet, or like most distributors, they got 8 wheels in them or 8 teeth because there's 8 cylinders, but it's this little tiny thing. And I think the distance between the pickup points leads to inconsistencies in the readings, I guess you could say.
So just put it off the balancer and be done with it. Pick it up from there.
Pretty much.
Pick up your timing from there.
Yep. And the trend now seems to even be either a 12 count wheel on the front or even a 4 count. So you basically, you get 8 counts for 2 complete engine revolutions, and the distance between each magnet on the crankshaft on the crank trigger, is 6-7 inches. By the time it travels around, might not be quite that long, but it's at least 4 inches between when each trigger wheel is on or magnet is on the crank trigger, and it definitely, I think, leads to better accuracy. I've seen some guys saying they struggle with crankshaft signal with even the 58X LS stuff. Like most of the high RPM guys, they switch down to the 4X or a 12X wheel on the crank trigger. It seems to be okay. Now, we haven't had a problem with Soccer Mom.
Because it's not really a horsepower thing. It's just RPM at that issue. If you can read clearly at 10,000 RPM, which is pretty out there for an LS.
Yeah.
It's a little spicy if you start talking about, that many zeros in RPM on an LS.
Yep. I accidentally turned our Texas Speed 388 like 93 at sick week. Didn't mean to do that. I turned our stock stroke 5.3, our old engine, I turned it 94.50.
Was it still making steam up there too?
No.
It was just out of...
Nope. It was totally done. But like what happened with the Texas Speed motor is we changed the transmission gear, and I forgot to change the shift point to be available sooner. So on my shift strategy in the Holly, I have RPM, but I also have a time reference so that you don't you spin the tire, say at a half second, and it, makes 8,000 RPM, and then it shifts. And so then now if the tires are already spinning and it shifts, that's not going to stop spinning because it just grabbed another gear. And now your wheel speed goes from, 90 miles an hour to 160.
Yeah.
And you're never going to recover it, and the car's on ice. So I put a time qualifier as well as RPM. Well, on sick week, we changed the transmission midweek, and I shortened it a little bit, but I didn't shorten it near enough. And the thing's out there flying down the track, and I'm like, golly, that sounds like a lot of RPM. And I reached over and clicked it. And when I went back and looked at the data, it was like just shy of 9,300 RPM. And I'm like, ooh, shoot, that's not ideal to do to it. And that was like literally that motor was 4 days old and almost junked it right off the rip, which would have been kind of sad.
Yeah, sometimes I worry those kind of like the getting fancy with the tuning like that is needed, but
Yep.
then it also runs into like ghosts almost in the programming where like something happens that
Yep.
shouldn't have happened. I know in like computer programming they call it like a ghost in the programming where something happens that wasn't intended,
Yep.
but everything kind of came together and made it one.
There's certainly been times where we've made some changes to something, and you know, you guys talked about super tuners with having Pete on here, and there's so many things that the tuner has to remember. Like when you make one change, well, that might affect 4 other things that you've got to remember, and then those 4 might affect a couple more, and so then you're like, the tuner's got to be deep enough in with your program to, you know, like with the wiring of the car and like all these different things, so that he knows when he makes a change to one thing, it doesn't negatively affect a whole bunch of other things. And then you waste 3 runs trying to figure out, well, what this thing just fell on its face and won't even go anymore.
Suddenly the dump valve's opening at the top of second and you're like, what the heck is that about? Like,
Yep. Yep. And like all of those things affect other things. And that's one thing that these new ECUs allow is you can get lost if you're not, you know, responsible enough with the tune and all of the changes you're making, that you might go out there and actually make the car a lot worse and then have to back up. And then in the middle of all that, there's also the possibility of you end up with a corrupted file because the USB cable wiggles loose while you're trying to, or it wiggles enough that it affects some data being sent across. I don't know if that's a thing or not, like with real computer stuff, but I know I've had problems where with some different stuff I've done where all of a sudden there's a problem and it doesn't make sense for anything why there's a problem. Everything looks okay in the data, but now the thing all of a sudden won't rev.
Well, and then it can be mechanical as well.
Yep.
So you're sitting there chasing a tuning issue, but it's really a mechanical issue. The freaking converter's broken or something, and you're like, keep throwing timing at it to try to get up on the boost, and you're just like, oh, what the heck is going on?
That happens too. And then to solve some of the problems, like I've had to reload an old tune and then the problem is fixed. And then you go back and make the same changes that you made that caused the problem before, and now they don't. And it's like, okay, well, that's interesting. But yeah, throw the mechanical monkey wrench into the situation, and now you're like, oh, shoot. Like that's where these super tuner guys that, like that's their job. Like they go so deep in knowing so much about the car, and it's like, it's really impressive what the guys do. I mean, guys like Steve Petty, and you know, he's been in the game, golly, like forever, like in the pro line camp, and like I remember him from all the way back in the days of early outlaw drag radial, and like even back then, I remember him being. He actually tuned Will's car at one point, gave us a bass tune, and you paid a bunch of money for him, and literally he shows up, loads a tune in it, and you're done in like 30 minutes. And he's like, all right, well, let's take it to the track. Like we ran it on the dyno, and the car wouldn't hardly stayed glued to the dyno. I think Will's car back then was making like 2,200 wheel, something like that. It was pretty stout.
Yeah.
And it was like, we made a couple of pulls, like, I think the first one went to 7, the next one went to 8. And then he's like, all right, load in the box. Let's go to the track. Like, okay. And he's still in the game doing it. And he focuses on, I think, getting the job done, but also staying simple enough that you don't end up on this crazy rabbit trail of chasing problems that you created yourself, which.
Yeah, you were kind of on the other end of my thoughts are always like, I don't have a whole lot of data on my car, and it kind of works well like that. I don't overcomplicate myself.
Yep.
But then you have all the data, so you can get overcomplicated, and you know when something goes wrong, exactly what went wrong by looking at old files. And I, hang out with Brett and Jim a lot, and they have all these data on their car, and I'm like, man, you guys are probably doing it right. I feel like I need to step it up a little bit.
Yep, and I think as you learn what data is really important and what data is good just to have for cross-checking. Like, we have a weather sensor on Soccer Mom that's literally tells us the barometric pressure. It gives us a density altitude correction. It tells us the water grains. And
is it one of those new sensors that I've seen posted?
It's from Plimpton Innovations.
Yeah.
It's like a 1-inch little square. We stick it under the back bumper of the car on a piece of Velcro.
Pretty cool how those sensors seem like they have everything in them.
Yep. And all we use that for is correlation between runs. Like, we'll look at the data in the pits just to see kind of what we've got going on. Like, it's the air temp is 80 degrees today and the water grains are, I forget what a good water grain number is, but like
sounds like bracket racer of you.
Well, and
put the weather station up,
except it's in the car, and it's because we run a Holly. Like, it's literally all of that data is now in every single run. So you have something like we changed the tune in Soccer Mom a little bit for the 352 shootout a month or so ago, trying to go faster early, and the car picked up a little bit, but not as much as we were expecting. And so then I went and looked at my data, like from Indy and Bristol, and the air was, a couple thousand feet worse, even though and sometimes it felt good, but the barometric pressure wasn't there to have the air really compacted in. And going back on, one of the things that made Will extremely successful with his drag radial car is he wrote down every single change we made to the car. Like, all right, we changed the shock. We changed the front shocks, 1 click. We changed the rear shocks, 1 click, like for every single run. Yeah. And he wrote down the weather information. So one of our advantages, we would show up at like one of these events, and literally he'd kind of look at the weather. We'd walk out and look at the track, and he'd put a tune in it based off of runs that we had previously made, and he could call his shot and be within 200s. He's like, it's going to go out and go a 425.
Yeah.
And we'd be like, 423 to 427. Like, we'd be right there on top of it. And when you can unload off the trailer and make a killer first lick, it's like, okay, now everybody else is on kind of like on their back heels a little bit. If they've got all of a sudden, you come out and you're running 95% of your potential on the first run, and then you use the second and third and fourth qualifying round, if there is one, to really stand on it, going out there and kicking the tires first round and second round because you're trying to, rotate the earth on the first run doesn't always work out the best for you. And like, I give full credit to Will on that. And like, he had his car just dialed, and we didn't have it was Will paying for the car back then. He didn't have the budget like these big teams to go try all the newest and latest and greatest and, put 6 different converters in the car throughout the year. We worked with what we had and little changes to where we're showing up with the same thing and we're still competitive. And everybody else is, we're putting the latest turbo on it, and we're doing this and we're changing this, and like, not knocking anybody, but that it's hard not to chase the latest and greatest thing sometimes, where the guy that works his combination and knows it really well, like Brett and Jim, like, their stuff is
it's like
on.
Small hammer is best on that stuff, because once you just start swinging a big hammer, you just kind of go over your skis, I guess, in a way they call it, where you kind of like you're overshooting it, and you need to just small hammer, keep taking away. If you have a combo that can work and be dialed in, you should just keep ironing that out, especially in these class races where the rules are so tight that you're not really like Ultra Street rules right now.
Yeah.
They're all within a number of each other.
Yeah.
You just need to dial in your combo.
Yep. I watched qualifying, and I mean, James, that Camaro he's driving, he went from, I think they were qualified 3rd at an event here not too long ago. And then when I looked at the sheets last night, like, they were like 12th or something. Yeah. And like, they're not far off. They're just, everybody's within a 10th for sure. And you go from being at the top of the field to now, now I'm going to have to run like one of the top 3 or 4 qualifiers first round.
It's not like our streetcar class where like top qualifier is a 660 and then like bottom qualifier is like a 950 car.
Yep.
Like, this is like 456 to a 465 across the board. It's like
and
decided on the tree half the time.
And back to your kind of like original question that started this whole talk, like with Soccer Mom, we don't have so Soccer Mom's a 3-man team. There's Kimber, who owns the body of the car, and then Will and I kind of own different parts and pieces, and we pay for maintenance. And like, we don't have the time to chase the class racing stuff as much as we used to. And like this drag and drive stuff is a lot of fun for me and Will. We're trying to get Kimber to come do it. So Kimber, when you listen to this, you need to come do it.
Yeah, come on, bring out Pool Boy.
Yeah, well, yeah. So that one's getting a full cage right now.
So that would be a fun.
Well, and I'm building my Cutlass. So the idea is that, Kimber and CJ, his son, could go take Soccer Mom, and then me and Will are in my Cutlass, or me and somebody else, or, some combination. We've got a bunch of cars we're kind of building in between customer stuff. And, with being a dad, I got my dad shirt on this weekend because I'm actually passing through. Even though I'd rather be at the Snowbirds, I'm passing through town because my youngest has state gymnastics championships this weekend.
We know you'd rather be at gymnastics than at Snowbirds.
No, I wouldn't.
Pro mods or gymnastics? Come on.
I mean, being that it's my kid out there competing, 100%. But we've had, I think, 6 meets around the country or around Florida so far this year. We've been to Jacksonville, Orlando, Tampa earlier, Winter Haven, Auburndale, I think.
At least it's fairly Florida based.
Yeah, so she competes in the Florida state championships or whatever. So, and it's being that she's out there and she's done really well. She's won a lot of stuff and she's won her all around at every event. And so maybe by the time this comes out, we'll know.
Can still kind of come out.
Yeah, but for sure. And seeing her do well. And I mean, we go to the trampoline parks up in Gainesville and she's out there bouncing, doing flips. And I'm just like, yeah, that's my kid. This is awesome. It's cool to watch her.
The most dangerous sport, technically.
Yeah.
Which is crazy. Most people don't realize. They'd be like, oh, the most dangerous, sport is like football or something. But I think more concussions and stuff happen in
Well, you figure
gymnastics.
there's probably 50 or 60 people on a football team. And in gymnastics, it's on a squad. There's maybe, the University of Florida, I think, has 10 to 12 girls that are on their gymnastics team. And so, and they're all at risk because they're all competing. We're on a football team, nobody plays every single play in the game, so there's less time for them to get injured. And then you got your guys that are say your wide receivers, they half the plays they're not even in any danger, I guess you could say. But then there are the times where they're front and center for where the danger's at. Where in gymnastics, every single attempt at something, you could slip off the beam and smack yourself on the floor, which the floors are padded.
You're high up in the air many times.
Yep.
You're not really high up in the air.
Yep.
Football or ideally drag racing, you're not.
Hopefully you're not in the air.
But
that's
ideally not. Let me turn on this other AC. All right, guys, I wanted to interrupt this real quick to say if you enjoy what we're doing here, I only ask one thing. Hit that subscribe button. It means a lot. It helps us grow and we can keep this thing going. Now, let's get back to the podcast. Thank you guys so much for the continued support. So, your boy Garrett at World Cup, that was a big one with rules.
Yep.
I feel like there was a lot of misinformation on what people think.
Yep.
I get his class last year, and I'm not saying he should be out there just getting destroyed by cars, but it is tough when somebody has that engine combo and that turbo combo.
Yep. And kind of like Doug said, you have to rule a class by what the potential of a combo is.
Yes.
And I think Garrett would tell you they've got probably 1,000 horsepower left in that combination when they turn the boost up. Steve's advertised that motor is able to handle 70 pounds of boost, and I think they're still around 50.
Can't boast about being able to make the power.
Yeah.
And then also not getting the class you want. It's a tough one, and I would love to have seen him win and, go into a class that he was more competitive in.
Yep.
But we're talking the engine combo in that chassis is obviously not right.
And that car, the kind of the roundtable discussion in that last video. Well, it wasn't the last video, but with Lyle and Pete and Doug and all them, that car doesn't fit anything very well. When we were a part of the original build, the goal was to run high sixes, and that didn't seem like too much of a stretch, especially with a small block because you're not carrying all the extra weight of a giant big block. And the big turbos that a big block needs. So
Car was heavy to begin with.
yeah, it was 30.
Even a roller is heavy.
It was just shy of 3,500 originally. With him in it, with maxed out street stuff, the air to water intercooler, so the water box and all that other stuff, and then made the conversion to alcohol, and then that was steel doors and roll up and down windows and factory glass everywhere, the factory front end, and you look at like what the car could have been, like if he wanted to build that car specifically to a class now, like say for modified street for sick week, like you're starting with a roof and quarters and building a whole new car underneath it and about 2 feet of the front frame. And literally it's carbon tubs, it's carbon floor, because you're trying to build the car as absolute light as you can get it.
And even the front frame, they cheater those things up too. They cut them out and like...
Yep, you can move them around. And
yeah, like what Tin Soldier does in the back frame of cars I've seen, where it's just like one layer of frame.
Oh yeah, the fact that's legal by the rules.
Frame, but it's just like one little layer.
It's notched for tire clearance.
Yeah.
And the funny thing is, like the cars on a 275 don't even need the frame notch for tire clearance.
Yeah.
But you don't want to carry a 2x3 piece of tubing for the frame, which is kind of basically what the frame is.
Yep.
Like for a G body is what I'm specifically talking about. Where when you can just have the skin for the inner frame rail, and that skin's doing nothing but just it might be attached to the actual chassis of the car, because really no factory chassis is designed to handle, I would argue, even 1,500 horsepower.
Yeah, well, especially a G-body. I mean, they're notoriously
floppy.
bad about that.
The G-body shuffle. So.
Even completely cut up and tubed and caged and everything, they still do that.
Yep.
They still shuffle. I don't know if that's I don't know what would cause that much, because even all modified, they still do it. Is it?
You can get around it with enough bars.
Is it
and enough bars in the right place? So like one of the things with Mullet is it does not have the bars that come down and triangulate from the top of the roll cage down to the rear frame rails. And the car is 10 inches longer in the wheelbase than pretty much anything else out there, with it being an El Camino. So you stretch out this really long ladder, and it has no triangulation. The center section of the car in the driver's compartment is really stiff. And then it's got a very nice rear frame section, but when you start making triangles to tie all that stuff together, that's when you get the stiffness out of the car. And the car has to be tuned. I was actually talking to Ty about this a couple weeks ago. Like they have to tune the car and set it up crooked so that when all the power comes in, the car literally kind of straightens itself out and goes straight down the racetrack.
Yeah.
And with your Fox bodies and a car that's got a lot of roll cage in it, that's got all of the triangulation bars in the right place, you're going to get away, and the huge anti-roll bars and stuff that we're running now, like you can get the twist out of them.
Yeah, like Leroy's stiff. Like that car is a very stiff chassis. Corvettes are stiff to begin with, and especially a base model one where they have steel frame, but like they've just made that car stiffer. Like that's probably the
and lots if you just
deal.
look at that, the silhouette of the roll cage compared to what like Mullet is, like Leroy's got better cage than Mullet does in a lot of aspects, because there's that extra triangulation.
And not safety
there.
you're talking about, but you're talking about chassis cage.
Chassis stiffness.
Because people would be like, oh my gosh, then Leroy's safer. It's not safety wise. They're about the same driver containment.
Yeah, the driver compartment is basically the same.
Chassis caging. Don't want people to misconstrue that you're saying the El Camino is more dangerous. Granted,
at the speeds it's going, I mean, 230 plus miles an hour. Like when we were originally building the car, we were hoping to go 200.
Yeah.
And I should have known better, like, and kind of put my foot down on putting the rear triangulation bars in the car. But I was kind of like, this is going to be the goal of the car. And then that's where it's kind of going to be. And then he kept growing the car and going faster and faster and faster. And I'm like, golly, that thing was not intended to do what it's doing.
Yeah.
And the difference in going 690s at 200 versus going 630s at 230 is massive. I mean, that's literally 2,500 horsepower different to go from upper sixes to bottom sixes at the mile an hour he's going. maybe 2,000 horsepower, but it's a lot of horsepower.
I know when people talk about that 5 number, it's like that's a world away.
Yeah.
That is like a different ballpark of car. Like you're talking about a whole different car. Like, you know, I'm not going to say mullet can't do it, but it probably shouldn't.
I would probably agree with that. And actually, I talked with Ty, and I've even talked with Garrett about it a little bit. And rather than rebuild mullet, and he may decide to rebuild mullet, like with everything that's there. You cut out stuff, you add stuff back to it. And we're in a similar situation with Soccer Mom. Like Soccer Mom's chassis is only legal for 750.
Yeah.
Even though we go below.
And it's a heavier car, naturally. Like it's always going to be heavy unless you just chop it all up.
Yep. And the way to move forward, I would think with mullet or with Soccer Mom, is to actually, when you can, build another car, and then you just transplant the engine and transmission and the rear end into the other car, or leave the rear end in it with all the suspension on it. And then you have 2 cars now, because to cut the car completely apart and basically render it useless while you build it back to where it can go faster, you've got downtime, you've got, you know, all of the, but you still put the same amount of money in rebuilding car number 1 that you could put into building a completely separate car. You'll probably spend a little bit more building another car, but then you also end up with 2 cars, and you can sell that first chassis to somebody that's, you know, not going to go as fast as.
Legitimately internal debates I have as well with my car, because my car's in that same boat. Like, okay, yeah, I put a 25.2 in it, but then it's like, okay, it's still a heavy F body. I still need doors, hatch, glass. Like, I might as well just get a Fox body roller that's already 25.3 and
then they're out there too.
And put my combination in there and go faster.
Yep. Or if you really like the F body life, the old Catfish Camaro, like that car could be 300 to 400 pounds lighter if you started with just quarter panels. Well, you start with a car and then you cut everything out. You put a carbon roof on it, like it's carbon tubs. There's literally no factory inner floor left. And I would almost argue that when you start getting into that, you want to go faster than 750 range. That's kind of the better way to build a car, is you literally just cut it all out, because working within the confines of, I mean, you got to work within the confines of the rules, but working within the confines of the stock body gets you into trouble. I mean, you still have to maintain your stock suspension points, at least for some classes, but we've got a car we're working on now where we roof and quartered it. And we kept the firewall, the factory door jambs, the roof and the quarters, and then literally the entire floor is gone. It's a 25.2, 25.3 dual cert chassis, 4-linked in the back, carbon tubs, carbon transmission tunnel, double frame rail. It'll take anything the guy ever wants to throw at it. And like, if you, like your car and the way my car was, and the way Soccer Mom is, like for us to really go any faster consistently, we'd have to cut so much stuff out that it's not worth the time and effort to do all of that. So,
and that's a problem too, is the cars start to get inconsistent when you try to throw that kind of power at them, because the chassis will do something weird. It'll flex some kind of weird way.
You'll bend something. Like,
you won't even realize, but the chassis will be holding you back on that, even if you think it's good. It'll just do something weird that one time, and then you just lose consistency like that.
Yep, and it may take you a while to even realize it's happening, because you might be on some really good tracks like Bradenton down here, and the car spins occasionally, and you're like, oh, okay. But then you go to another track, and you can't get down the track no matter what you do, and now you're behind the 8-ball, and then it's all of a sudden you start looking deeper into the car for that mechanical issue, and you're like, oh, well, the rear end's cocked a little crooked. That's interesting. And then you find you got a bent bracket somewhere into the car. And when you're trying to reinforce the factory spots on a car, like, you know, the thing to do on a Fox body Mustang is you cut out those lower torque boxes and the upper torque boxes, and there's aftermarket solutions available now.
Yeah, they just weld right in.
You install those, and then you tie the roll cage to them, because really the roll cage, and it becomes a full chassis to the car. That's where all your strength and your stiffness is coming from.
The body's just kind of sitting on the car at that point.
Body ain't doing nothing. Yeah. Like, that body's along for the ride. Like, and it's weird to think about that, because like 10 years ago, the whole trend was these, like I'll say 15 years ago, like you'd go to Orlando for the World Street Nationals and there was some sketchy stuff out there running and it was going pretty fast too. You got somebody that dragged some Fox body out and put a 900-inch big block in it with a 850 legal cage, or what would be an 850 legal cage now. And that sucker's all twisted up going down, but they're hustling it down the track and it was exciting, but you also had a lot more downtime because people were putting them in the fence and wheeling them and blowing motors up. And
well, that tire too, you kind of treated the tire differently where you needed it to like plant and squat it and squish the tire down. Now you kind of want the tire to act a lot differently and nose the car down. And
yeah, the radial scene has definitely gotten nuts. Like you watch a radial car and how they separate and drive the tire into the ground these days is...
At 1,200 feet, they're still doing that too, which is insane. There was that video of Grubworm where it's like touching the nose on the track still at 1,200 feet.
And some of that's really good for aero. Like, especially the F bodies are really, really good in the aerodynamic department.
Especially his with everything closed off. No mirrors.
Getting that nose down, cutting the air down that's going underneath the car. Like, that's huge. And that thing, like, from 1,000 foot on, it's ripping. Like it went like 220 something miles an hour or something like that.
And it's rare to also see cars running quarter mile like that, small block cars still pulling like that at 1,000 feet. Like people don't realize like us small block guys, I'm really small block, but like we're all in at like, 600 feet. We're already all in.
Yeah, I mean,
to see that thing still like gaining steam is crazy.
Yeah, I mean, in Soccer Mom, if I'm on a good track, I'm all in at a second. Like I've got all the boost curves done at a second, and it's along for the ride from then on. And like maybe it's a little bit longer than a second. It kind of depends on which tune-up we've got in it. But the stock block combo with the fiberglass nose and doors was literally, in fact, it was all in at 0.8 of a second.
Well, because LSs really don't like big power out the back either. Like
it's a small engine. When you're putting that much power through them, like you start getting into the need for the billet stuff, and that just...
But even then, like they still... Keeping head gaskets in those cars is always in an LS running quarter mile in street trim, which, I always say street trim is like 3,100, 3,200 pounds. Like
that weight
most
makes
of us
a big
street
difference.
guys can't get away from weight.
Yep. So Soccer
and you don't
Moms,
see too many 200 mile an hour LS cars in street trim. Very few.
Nope. Garrett did it with mullet, but it was tough.
And it wasn't a drag and drive, going to run 200s every pass. That was like ragged edge of that
Yeah,
motor.
because we heard it a couple of times. Like I remember I heard, and some of that too was learning alcohol tuning, which I'm still learning alcohol tuning. And I think anybody that, at least any kind of tuner, is going to tell you they've always got more stuff to learn. At least the ones that aren't really, really high on themselves.
Yeah, the good ones will hopefully still be learning.
Yeah, like I want to go to Pete's class that he does. Like if I didn't have something to do the weekend after PRI, like I literally would be up there at his place going to their school, and I just haven't been able to work it out. And I have tuning classes at my shop. Like we've had multiple Holly tuning classes at my place. There. Yeah, we did. I remember that, pushing it down the road to get it to crank.
That was a bad move.
Old neighbor way back in the day.
It put a hole in the block.
It did. Whew, that was the old shop too.
Yeah, hydro locked that thing.
That was an interesting day.
We brought neighbor up there for a tuning school, and it was on a Holly, and we were gonna use it as the tuning, and it wouldn't crank, and Garrett was like, well, we'll push down the hill and I'll pop the clutch. And for some reason, that seemed like the best move. It
apparently
definitely wasn't.
Push starting had worked in the past, and that he said push starting is going to work. So my old shop had kind of a downhill onto the main road.
The only hill in Florida was right there.
So a couple of us pushed the thing going, and it kind of cranked, and then freaking blew a rod out the side of the block. Like something was not happy, and we were like, oh.
I assume it hydro locked.
Who knows?
Yeah,
that was the old 2-valve motor?
It was the 5.4.
Okay.
Whatever. I'm pretty sure it was
completely
the 5.4,
stock bottom end.
The GT500 engine.
Okay.
Those are not cheap.
No.
Mod motors, not cheap. You guys running mod motors,
Yeah.
They're proud of those things when they build them.
Yep. And they're not that much cheaper. Even going back, we've done some 2-valve street stuff just for some different customers, and like typically we do a lot of more basic engine builds, I guess I could say, at my shop, like are your typical, bolt-on rod piston LS stuff. We do some big block stuff. Like I got a big block, a 565 going together for a guy. Got a 598 that's going in a twin turbo airboat.
What do you use for those deals? Like a stock block, or are you using like a big M block? Or?
Yeah, big M.
Yeah, pretty much that's standard.
Yeah, that's I think the best big block to have, shy of the like exotic, billet block stuff. So
big M block can make 3,000 horsepower pretty comfortably.
Yeah. I think Will's,
once you spend the money on the crank, you're
Will's 615 was a tall deck, big M, if I remember right. I have to ask Steve about that when I see him at PRI, if I remember.
But back to like LS being kind of at its limit in your combination. Would, like, at that weight, do you think you can really squeeze much more out the back? Or like I just like the 200-mile LSs seem like they're so sparse now.
I definitely think it can be done. There's certainly different levels of,
like a drag and drive LS going 200 is rare.
It's going to take something pretty light. Like it's going to take something pretty light to do that. And I think a lot of it comes down to how well the track is, for one, because you're going to need a good track. And then you also have to, the tuner's got to be on top of his game. The car's got to work. And you have to really front half the car really hard, which is going to make the track even more important, where with a big block, you can kind of roll it out soft and, go 650 at 220.
The Rick Prospero route.
Yep. Yep. And like, and his combination is not crazy exotic. And I think you look at just that engine size, most of your LS stuff. Yeah, I think your good boosted LS combos on the high end are a 427. And I mean, you get into the big block stuff, and on the low end, you're in the 540 range, and then you start getting into the like 572s. I think are kind of popular, because I think that's about what the 481Xs are. Like the 481X doesn't have to do with the engine size; it's actually got to do something with
bore spacing or something.
Maybe I think that's maybe what it is, but.
Yeah, because Steve makes his version of the 481, and then Proline has theirs, and then Noonan makes some badass stuff along that line.
Really, like all that shiny-bility stuff is like, ooh, this is pretty. Too pretty to be in an engine.
I know. I was watching Justin Swanstrom pulling out a blown-up Noonan. I'm like, oh my gosh, you're so hard on stuff.
Yeah, and I've gotten to hang out with Clay Milliken a little bit, and
great guy.
Yeah, and I don't know if did you have him on when he was down here?
No, he didn't get it to come on.
Oh, that's right. He had to bail out.
He'll be back in February, though.
Yeah, I'm excited to come down here for that event, for the big promo or Top Fuel. Like,
shout out to that event too, because there will be Top Fuel cars on property at Bradenton for the first time ever, I believe.
They used to
first time in this trim and this speeds and stuff.
Yep.
You can't really compare it too much to the old stuff, but it will happen again, and it's going to be insane.
Yep. I mean, they're probably 5,000 horsepower ahead of where they used to be when they came here and ran quarter mile. Because I mean, I think when Bradenton was IHRA, they had some Top Fuel stuff, and then the NHRA was always a little ahead of the IHRA stuff, I think. And they're going almost 340 to 1,000 foot now. Like, I was actually at the track when Kenny Bernstein broke 300 at Gainesville. Like, I was a little kid, and to think that they're now going 300 to the 8th mile, and then 340 to the 1,000 foot, or right at 340 to the 1,000 foot. And they'd already would have gone 340 to the 1,000 foot if the NHRA didn't have the RPM restrictions that they put on them. And like, the Top Fuel cars have a timing retard that comes in towards the top end of the track. That's, I don't know if it's based off of wheel speed or something, but they're, I think, trying to keep them under 340. But you take away that restriction, like it was in the early 2000s when they were running. Like, you give the guys what they know now. You give them the rule set from like the early 2000s, and they're going 360 out the back door in a Top Fuel car.
That is like unfathomable numbers for most people. Yeah. Like, even me trying to think about that is like, it's so it like looking at that slip, I'm like, what broke on the timing system? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You're like, oh, a bird flew in front of the...
Yep. And the interesting thing to me when I got to look at Clay's data, like our cars, and I would say even like a car like Mullet, you know, it's going to peak G before probably a second and a half into the run.
Yeah.
Like Clay's car peaks G at 7 Gs out there at like 2.5, 3 seconds into the run. Like as they're approaching the 8th mile, that's when the clutch is locking up and everything's, you hear the motor, you can hear actually the engine. People are going to gripe that I keep saying motor. But like you hear the engine actually tug itself down. Like in the RPM, when they leave the starting line, it comes up to like 8,000. They're slipping the clutch. They're applying the clutch. And then when it tugs when the clutch grabs a hold of the engine out there at 2.5 seconds, that's when all the G happens. And that sucker will pull 6.5, 7 Gs.
Because it's kind of like a CVT where it's just like
Kinda.
slowly applying.
Yeah, and then it finally goes to full lockup out there at 2.5 seconds or whatever it is.
They're almost using it as like gearing as it goes in a way. Like
Kinda.
the clutching.
I mean, they're basically, if you want to envision it like what you do with a normal street car, like they're sliding off the clutch until they're 2 seconds into their run. Or if you want to compare it to a street car, basically you could put the car in high gear and then you're sliding the clutch all the way until half track. And then by the time you finally get the car moving fast enough to get it to half track, now the clutch is completely locked up. Of course, in a street car, you couldn't do that because it would have burned itself out of the car by then. But the top fuel clutches and all the technology they've got that goes into that is just like next level stuff. And
it's trickled down into street car stick shift. I don't even... Calling it street cars is kind of a disservice to street cars because they're not street cars anymore.
The top level stick shift guys with all the slipper clutches and...
None of them are street cars. They're just factory bodied cars at this point.
Yeah, like the Classic World Cup, you might have had maybe 3 or 4 real cars that see some street time. And it's not knocking anybody. That's just what the class has progressed to.
They're not street cars. They don't have cooling systems.
Yep. If you want to be competitive in the class, you're on alcohol, cooling system, you don't do all that stuff because you don't want to carry the weight.
5th and 6th gear in your car.
Yep.
You leave those out of the trans.
Yep. Less reciprocating weight. Like everything is maximized to the finest degree at the upper levels of really any racing. And that's kind of goes back to why we don't do the class racing stuff. Because like we could take Soccer Mom and to make it ultra street competitive, $50,000 would be what we would have to put into the car. And we're having too much fun to not want to have to do that.
Well, that's why I like when people mistake my car and James's car that he drives.
Yeah.
Because I know what's into that car.
Yep.
And I know that it's got to grind his gears a little bit. Like I always mess with Gonzo who owns the car. He's a great dude. We're friends. But like it's got to frustrate him just a little bit.
And I mean, for like those of us that know the cars, like they're similar color. I think his is a slight bit brighter silver than yours, but
mine has 300,000 miles on it. And
are they actually the same paint code?
I'm pretty sure.
Okay.
And his has 300 when he bought. Like he bought it new off the showroom floor. I bought it with 300,000 miles on it. So they shouldn't be similar in any way.
I just thought maybe the paint code was brighter on his car, but maybe not.
I think it's just much nicer. But that's why I like to poke fun at it being like oh, look, same car, same thing.
Yep. And I tell you, like, he could probably tell you because I know they're one of the faster nitrous guys, I think. And, like, that's a tough game to play. Like, you miss the tune-up because of the weather and, like, there goes a piston or two.
Yeah.
And it's not uncommon to see them with the heads off, putting pistons and stuff between rounds. And I ain't about that life anymore.
And Nate's getting a hold on that tune-up stuff because, that was pretty new for him as well when he got involved in that car. Nothing against Nate. It was a big power, nitrous, big cylinder-headed LS. Like, it's a finicky combo where you're very jet limited. So there's probably a learning curve as well.
I think there's a bit of a learning curve really with like any new car. Like when any tuner gets a hold of a new combination, like a vehicle or a new customer they're working with, you can't just put the same tune-up that you had in, McFlurry. Well, not McFlurry because it's not an LS, but like say back when...
Toss Ruby's tune-up in there.
Yeah, you couldn't put Ruby's tune-up in Leroy. That kind of stuff, even though they're they were same cubic inches, and they're not even a great comparison because, you know, Leroy's so much lighter. But like you take two seemingly identical cars on paper, and to make them both run at their peak, there's going to be little differences in the tune. Just not every engine is exactly the same, even though it's the same parts. Like they may not make exactly the same horsepower, or the torque converter might be different enough that it doesn't, you know, quite the same torque converters may not exactly run or do the same, have the same performance in both cars. Yeah. Like you just have to go out there and tune it and do the things that you got to do to keep making the cars go faster. So,
and you can, in Ultra Street, you have to dial that car in so much more than like a car like Ruby, where you can just put any size turbo on it, you're fine.
Yep.
But with that, like you have to make sure every cylinder's happy. Every like,
yep.
There's these little bits that all have to work extremely well together.
Yep. Yeah, you can't just over turbo the car, which I think is kind of where Garrett ended up with Mullet at World Cup. Like it's got, you know, the big billet engine in it, but it also has a lot of turbo on it. So even though the engine size was similar with the old cast big block that went 640s or I think it tickled a 640.
Yeah.
But that was so on the ragged edge of that motor engine. And unfortunately,
it's Ford Motor Company, it's General Motors.
Yeah, that's
it's
true.
Fine.
Like
I call it motor.
All these EV guys, it's not a motor. Motors are electric.
Yeah.
Okay.
The motor's on the side that starts the engine.
Yeah. Yeah. But like in super competitive class racing, you're on the edge. Like, because if you're not on the edge, somebody else is, and they're going to run faster than you. And that's where you have to be, like in the road race world that I tinker around in with, which I say tinker. I mean, I'm a crew chief for a Trans Am car, or in a Trans Am series car. Like we run a Dodge Viper. It's
not a Trans Am?
No, which is very confusing for a lot of people. It's the Trans Am series, and we race a Dodge Viper. Well, like, for example, like we could show up on the tires that we ran at the last event. Tires are fine. They will go out there, they'll make laps, you'll be able to get the car around the track safely. But if you don't put new tires on the car, you're a second a lap off of what the potential of the car is, because those new tires are going to be at least a second faster.
Okay.
So you have to show up at every event and put a brand new set of $4,000 slicks on the car. And it's like you do that at every single race. Now, some guys, some teams, we're, I would say, one of the lower budget teams for what like the Trans Am series is. Like most of them are showing up with huge semi rigs, and like Lee that I crew chief for, we show up with a motorhome and a small like 32-foot trailer. We sometimes tuck into somebody else's big tent rig that, you know, they got a huge tent off the side of their semi trailer, and they've got 4 cars they're racing, and awesome series to come watch. But it's cubic dollars when it comes to that kind of racing. And it's like in the top series, similar to the drag race world, they've got 2 spare engines in the trailer. They got a spare MCO $30,000 sequential transmission in the trailer, because one oops and you just wrecked a gear in the transmission, blew the case apart, and well, you got to make the event because you're running for a championship, so you got a spare one in the trailer. And those guys, they have to run the best of everything, or you're giving up an advantage to another racer. And that's kind of the way it is. I feel like in any kind of professional racing, that's kind of the way it ends up. And even semi-professional racing, like anybody, I think could go do. They could participate in, like, say, the Trans Am series, or like you can buy your way into a NASCAR Cup ride if you brought enough funding. I mean, look at what Travis Pastrana did, like earlier this year. Like,
I think people don't realize that you can race NASCAR. Like you can just do it if you have a pocket for it. Like if your pockets are deep enough, you can just do that. Like it's not as unattainable as people realize.
It's a boatload of money.
Yeah.
But if you can write that check, you can go race in a truck or a NASCAR truck. You can go race the Xfinity Series, and it's a bummer that it's like that, because in a lot of ways there's less emphasis on true driver skill. like it used to be that, you know, you progress up through your local circle track into maybe some regional stuff, and then you might do a couple of regional, say Busch Grand National events back when it was the Busch Series. And then now it's you start to develop you go all the way to, like, you look at what Kevin Harvick is doing with his son. Like, he started in a go-kart when he was 4 years old.
Yeah.
And now he's groomed to be this excellent racer, and he's going to be. And then he'll gather some companies that want to be part of his journey.
Shouldn't be hard. He's got a pretty known name.
Yeah.
Helps.
And so, like, is he going to be better than somebody else that maybe has a boatload of natural talent? You could make the argument probably both ways, but he's going to have the best of everything as he's developing through his career. And there may be somebody else that's near equal talent that never even gets a shot just because they don't have that funding to go with their talent.
Or the name, because...
Or the name.
It's like in any racing, like, they need seats filled.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, you can't really knock them for going, like, being more open arms to people that have a bigger name that can draw some names in. Like, of course, you know, Dale Jr., Earnhardt. That's a name that will fill seats, no matter how
100%.
He's obviously a great racer, but, like, no matter how good of a racer he was, that is a name that fills seats.
Yep.
Like, it's part of racing. Like, that's what was part of racing in, you know, current times where you need a following and to fill seats.
Well, and even you look at what Garrett has done with the Crown Vic races, and, like, it's genius, I think. Like, and I was so happy to be a part of it early on. And I hope I've established myself enough now that I will keep continuing to get invited back, because the first couple of races I raced like I wasn't going to get the chance to come back. And, like, I wasn't the reason for the Bristol crash, I'll say that. But, like, I raced really hard. And if you go back to the first Freedom 500 that I raced, I was leading with 5 or 10 laps to go. And Brent actually kind of jumped the restart. I'll say jumped the restart, like, because in the professional racing that I had always done, like, the leader restarts the race from a caution. So I'm waiting on the flag to react to it, kind of like you do a Christmas tree at the drag strip.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden Brent's passing me. And I'm like, what? And this isn't right. So, like, visibly after the race, I'm mad. Like, and I'm typically someone that's pretty level. Like, I don't get super upset about stuff. Like,
and he couldn't go red, so, like...
Yeah, he's literally passing me as we cross the start-finish line. And then I gather my wits, and I make a run. I catch back up to him. It's he and I first and second. Make a dive down to the inside of him, and he kind of pinches me low. And I'm like, well, I can wreck us both, or I can do my best to try and make the corner, and we both get through it. Well, it ended up spinning me out, and then I think Whistling Diesel spun me out, and then I think Jeremy spun me out. And by that point, I was just, like, kind of defeated. And I'm like, at that point, too, I didn't know that I was going to get an invite back. And I'm like, if I had won this thing, then I would 100% be coming back. And then now you look at what he's doing with, you know, he brings in all these huge celebrities that I consider them huge celebrities, like, you know, Jeremy McGrath and Travis Pastrana and all these huge names. And it's just like, wow, this is kind of cool that I'm even getting to be a part of this thing. And
it's cool with those names, for sure. I was actually wondering, though, how needed do you think they are right now? Like, do you think they, like, a lot of these names, how much do they really bump spectator count? Because he already draws so much.
Yeah, he does.
I feel like the spectator count is huge, and it's almost a bonus. It's almost just like, you know, you're going to watch regardless.
Yeah.
And then you add cool names on top of it.
I think the good...
Obviously, it can't just be randoms.
Yeah.
But...
Yeah, and that's the thing where I think the people he's bringing, like, they are skillful enough that I feel like we put on a good show.
Yeah.
And, like, it's gotten even better, like, year over year over year over year.
Hunt the Front has to be kicked out, though.
No, I want to beat those guys.
Yeah.
Like, as a racer, like, I don't want a gimme win. And one of the reasons, like, I don't know if you saw my video where I posted the stuff about my Ranger truck for the Danger Ranger series. Like, I was, you know, people said I was cheating and this and that and the other. And it's really, I just studied the rules and built a truck that took advantage of the rules. And that's even kind of like, that's making it sound like I did stuff that wasn't legal.
Erased the rule book.
Yeah, I race the rule book, and I'm not even one that like pushes the gray areas because I don't want to be that guy that after the race, all of a sudden they're like, and it kind of happened. Like I had done a heater bypass on the first one that I won, and it's instead of all of the factory steel pipes, I had just looped the heater hose from the bottom of the water pump up to the intake, and going through tech afterwards, like I had taken some of the stock hoses off and that are bolted to like around the valve cover area. And they're like, well, that's not stock anymore. It doesn't, and your EGR's blocked off. And I'm like, I didn't do that. Like that was like some of these trucks came with the factory EGR, the EGR's blocked off.
15-year-old trucks.
Yeah. And so like I go from winning this thing and all of a sudden I'm like, oh shoot, I might get bounced for cheating. And I didn't even know I cheated. Like,
Yeah.
And I'm not one that wants to push a rule set that, and this is one of the things where James, you know, he'll willingly admit he's reading between the lines. Well, I'm trying to read the line and then do the best with what I can do right on that line. I'm not trying to go between the gray areas and all that other stuff. Like for example, like the rule is a 200 tread wear tire. Well, there's 20 different 200 tread wear tires out there. So I go and do research on what the autocross guys are running because there's autocross events that mandate a 200 tread wear tire.
Yeah.
There's endurance road racing events like I used to do and intend to get back into that mandate a 200 tread wear tire. So you go do the research on finding out what the best 200 tread wear tire is. And Drew and I were the only guys that showed up with that tire on, and we whooped everybody. Like we had that race so far won, and even to the point where we were probably 90% through the middle of the race, so we didn't just run the risk of wrecking each other. And then with 10 to go, we just sent it. And we almost lapped the whole field in the last 10 laps, enough so that we spun out and I was still able to win even after spinning out on the last lap.
So you guys had some ringers
and
in the vehicle wise.
Yeah. And it's the base selection of the truck. And I go over this in my video where, you know, I talk about, I picked the Ranger that had the most horsepower and the best factory power to weight ratio, because you can get into a new truck, kind of like what Uncle Chet did, but that thing was probably 1,000 pounds more than anything else. And in any kind of limited
he was a target.
Maybe so.
I think he was a target regardless, but
yeah. And I mean, when I saw him bringing that, like I had some people comment about on my stuff and they were, are you worried about Uncle Chet? And I was like, I'm not worried about the truck, like, because I know it's, unless he puts a ton of effort in to like cutting a ton of weight out, which I saw in his videos he didn't. And then he put like really heavy bumpers on the truck, which I was a little scared of. But like the from what I know of racing, like low horsepower, you want to be as light as you can get. So, and that kind of transfers really over to anything rule wise. You know, if Mullet, let's say, could, you know, his class is 2,600 pounds, like it might have been at World Cup. Well, he's given up a huge advantage being 3,000 pounds.
Yeah.
And it's like you want to be right on the rules as best as you can be to have the best chance of doing well, I think. So.
Yeah, that's a tough one. I mean, the Rangers are scary to begin with. Those things go on their sides a lot. They go on the roofs a lot. The Bristol was pretty scary to watch. On dirt is a little hairy.
Yep. And there was
some of those cars were pretty high up there in the air.
Yeah, and there was some cages that they looked okay and got through tech. And then some of the ones from that big crash, I went and looked around at them, and they were very compromised.
Yeah, because that's tough too in tech, because whatever number of cars show up, you kind of can't really turn them away. Like all of them could have been turned away, but then you wouldn't have a race.
Yep.
And that's where it gets a little complicated.
Even my truck, and
you can of course turn them away, but then you lower car count and make the whole, and Bristol's big, so you really need some car count there.
Bristol, and for people that don't know, the Rangers are way faster than the Crown Vics, like way faster, even though they're
probably a lot lighter.
Yeah, that's all it is.
Yeah.
And we run, I think, on a stickier tire than what the Crown Vic stuff runs on. Like I think absolute best a Crown Vic will run with Garrett's rules is something probably 19.3, 19.4.
At the Freedom Factory?
Yeah, at the Freedom Factory. And at the Freedom Factory and my Ranger, I think I've got a shot at running into the high 17 second range.
Oh, wow.
If I went at 18.2 during the race, and like you give me some really good air and a clean track and like a fresh set of tires, like I think I could probably get it there. It'd be on the ragged edge, and I'd be running the risk of crashing it. And like, but it's got a shot at getting there, I think.
Yeah.
And like Bristol was, I mean, Bristol in the Crown Vics is intense. Like I went back and I'm working on my Bristol 1000 edit finally, and just going and watching the in-car video, like, yeah, we're flying. Like I think I saw on the Type
It's like
S
a wide
camera.
open throttle track, isn't it?
You can be wide open the whole lap. You'll grind the front tires off of it, but you can go the full lap wide open, but it will hurt the right front tire faster, and it'll pop. It'll end up popping the right front tire if you do that.
So it can't run the whole race like that, but it can be done.
Yep. And like, I think the highest mile per hour I saw on the Type S camera was like 97 miles an hour, and like then it drops down to like 85 in the corners.
Yeah, that's a pretty scary amount of speed for a Crown Vic.
Yep.
Coming into a turn and with the pack.
Yep.
And everything.
And thankfully, you know, I can say I take credit for this, but like, which is a bad way to do it, but like the big Bristol wreck, they stepped up the safety a lot since the big Bristol. You know, we got
the seats.
Yep, containment seats, full cages, like
Aluminum seats was a big switch though too.
Yeah. Yeah, just the full containment seat. Like I'm really big on trying to get like a race tech seat like in every car we build, just because I've had so much experience with them in the road race world and how well they fit and the comfort. Like
I want to get a race tech seat on my car at some point.
They're amazing. And like I have one in my road race car, and for people that don't know, I think we've got 11 wins in the Champ Car Endurance Series, and we race at like Sebring and Daytona and Road Atlanta and big tracks with 100 cars on track, and just having the comfort that the seat gives you, and not only the comfort, like the better you're belted into the seat, the more you feel what the car's doing underneath you. And that's something where I remember the first time I strapped Garrett into the road race car, he kind of complained I pulled the belts too tight. And I'm like, you'll forget about it in a lap. But I don't want you to be loose in the belts and somebody crash you and you get hurt.
I pull my belt super tight when I'm pulling into the beams.
Yep.
Like,
I mean,
right before the water box, I'm like, I like try to suck in a little bit.
Yep. Yeah, I'll push back against with my left foot. Like I'll push against any part of the roll cage I can push, or the brake pedal to bury me into the seat so that I can then get, that extra quarter inch of belt tightness.
Yeah, take like a breath to try to like.
Yep. Like it literally in the road race stuff, I leave the pits almost like at the point of discomfort. And then you get your adrenaline gets going. You actually lose body weight and lose like some body thickness, I guess you could say, because you're sweating out the water. And by doing that, and the belts, your suit compresses a little bit. Maybe the padding on the seat compresses a little bit. All of that stuff. Where like if I'm on the radio with our guys during an endurance race, I'm like, hey, you're an hour in, you better check your belts, make sure your belts are still as snug as they need to be. And you always get a little quarter inch or a half inch tug on the belts.
And the cushion seat, kind of moves a little bit. Like Kirkies don't have too much cushion, so they don't move too much. I've never really been in a race tech seat much.
Yeah.
But then like the Pro Mod guys, those are poured in.
Yeah.
They use like a plastic
that's even
mold
better.
That's like, once you're in there, you're not moving. If you gain some weight, they're re-pouring you a seat.
Yep. And that's years ago. The Pro Mod guys used to just have like the carbon buckets, like and Pro Stock too. They're just sitting in this bucket, and there was some guys that they'd side slap the wall and break a hip or break a leg or something like that because their body would move so much to where it put all of the impact, and this is my non-professional medical opinion, but like it put all the impact like right on their hip. And, if they're a, 40, 50-year-old or older guy, your bones aren't as strong as they were when you were 20. Yep. And so you get out there and you take a big impact on your hip and break a hip. Well, you're out of commission for a few months, like for recovery and there's been a trend where I've noticed, and I think it's a good one, like either the pour-in seats or a lot of pro mods are getting race techs in them now. And I mean, like, yeah, like you look at builds, I've seen some like McCamus and some Bickle builds, like they've all got the race tech full containment, like seats in it. And
that's probably nice too, because then any driver can really drive it. Because if you have a pour-in, it's pretty much just you.
You want the seat to fit you tight.
Yeah,
like,
but a race tech will fit anybody tight versus a pour-in.
Well, there's different size race techs. So you it's like kind of how you can order the Kirky aluminum seats. You can order them in different widths. Like you can order the race techs the same way in different widths, different heights. Like, and there's so many. You can even get them with cooling vents that blow on your lower back from your air system. And we use that in some of the road race stuff. So.
I noticed I noticed this on like Sick Week. Some of the cars, like a lot of cage and stuff, but their like seat would just be like a bucket, and then they would have like a padding on the cage.
Yep.
I was like, wait, that's your headrest? Just a padding on the cage?
Yep. I'm actually one of those, and we were wanting to change the seat in Soccer Mom.
Because it's like the cage is built with like the seat kind of thing.
Yep. So Soccer Mom's got, it's a good seat. It's an ultra carbon seat, but I bought the small one, so I just barely fit in it. Same with like Will and Kimber. We're all snug in the seat, and then we built pads for the funny car cage. So it's not the worst, but it's really too far away to really protect us. If we took a hard side impact, like we would probably be a little sore after a wreck. Yeah. And I've crashed a few cars when it comes to, so I crashed the burnout car at the Freedom Factory. That was a race tech seat, totally fine. I've crashed at Daytona, not huge crashes, so we run the 24-hour course at Daytona.
Are you reusing the seats?
I typically...
Like when it's crashed, it's done?
Yeah.
All right. I didn't know if you were like...
That's what you should do.
The burnout car, it wasn't like a high speed impact, but I'm sure it still...
It was a pretty good lick.
Tore it up.
Yep, because that was...
the white one recently?
No, just bumping walls. Okay. Like the red one's the one I crashed big.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking about.
That was one of the harder hits I've had, just because concrete wall. Like at Daytona, unless you hit the outside wall, like all of the infield wall sections have like a tire barrier, so you kind of pile into the tires and it doesn't hurt you too bad. Or it's not a huge like spike in impact G's. You kind of like hit this big soft wall, but being that you stay, and you can find lots of good videos on YouTube about people crashing, and actually Race Tech just shared one the other day where it's a rally car that misses a corner and they go off like 100-foot cliff, and they're tumbling through the trees, and like it's a camera mounted right between the two drivers on the roll cage, and you can see them kind of their arms and stuff moving around, but like they didn't get hurt at all, and they literally went like off into the woods, like off a cliff type setup, just tumbling.
Yeah.
For like the crash just keeps going, and I'm like, holy smokes, is this ever going to stop?
Like Pikes Peak deals are scary. Like they get up there and it's like snowing. They start in like a nice sunny 70 degrees, and then at the top.
I still want to go to that race.
Yeah, that's like Randy Pope's specialty, I feel like, is like Pikes Peak, and like it seems like he's in Teslas now a lot, which is crazy.
Yep, so he does some stuff with, I think it's, what's the name of that company?
Was it Electrified something, or...
I don't remember, but yeah, he was in a Tesla for a couple of years, and I mean, actually, I knew Randy from the endurance road race car world, like way before he ever did any of the stuff with Garrett, or he'd been a Motor Trend hot shoe for years, and then he does he did all their hot laps for all the Motor Trend tests and the magazines, and I think now he's doing a lot of. He has his own YouTube channel, but he's also doing a lot of coaching, like one-on-one coaching with stuff, and that's a good way for like pro drivers to make some money. Like people pay a lot to learn to be better on a road course or on an oval track or whatever it is.
For sure. I mean, if you can pay him to come in and shave a couple numbers off your lap times, that's pretty huge.
Yep.
Once you compound that.
And sometimes cheaper than what it would cost to have, some extra cheaty motor and then you run the risk of being cheating, where if you just drive the car better.
Yeah.
And like, that's part of my job as Lee's crew chief, is we have onboard data with video, and I'm watching And I'll even go around to different corners during the event, and I'll watch what his line looks like outside the car, and then I can watch and see what some of the other cars are doing. And sometimes we don't want to do what they're doing. Sometimes we do want to do what they're doing. So I get on the radio and I'm like, all right, you got 3 feet left on the outside of the track there. You need to change your line or pick up the throttle sooner so that the car wants to get out there to the edge of the track, or depending on where your turn-in point is, and all of that stuff matters, because just like having the car that meets the rules the best, if you got the best car out there, you're just as good as the guy that won the race last weekend, but you can't drive, you're down at the very tail of the field. And like, there's plenty of times, and even in the Crown Vic stuff, it kind of shows up that like those cars are all pretty equal, but some guys can get out there and like they're consistently up near the front, and then
They're
other
always
times
equal except for the ones that I drive. Anytime I drive one, it's way slower. And I blame Zach every time.
he pulled a plug wire off,
Like,
or
Zach, what did you do?
knocked a plug shut or something. Yeah, and I think they do just get tired. Like my car that I had for the 2.4 hours of Les Mullets was in Indy, so I won Indy with that car, and then came from last to second at Bristol before the crash this year, where I ended up just taking myself out.
There's gearing variation too. In those
Yeah,
cars. That's a big part of it, is the rear gear.
Yeah, and they've gotten, I think, a little better at making sure most of the cars have the same gear, and they've probably got enough of them they could start swapping the gears in.
The first one, we were in stock seats.
Yeah,
I was like,
I looked back, and
I was
I'm like,
so tired because like you're holding yourself in the seat more than you were even driving the car.
Yep. And I had my guys, one of the guys that works for me, literally pull the belt so tight I was like squished down into the seat, and like that was a big deal. Instead of like literally, if you're using all your body strength to hold yourself, because you turn the steering wheel to the left and it throws you over to the right, well now you're using your entire core to try and hold yourself in the car, and you just wear yourself out.
Yeah.
And like
It was hard.
Yeah,
It's hard work.
And like even more recently, like Zach kind of picked on me about my my cool shirt that I wear. And like it's an ice box that pumps ice water through this special shirt that I have that is keeping my core cool. And like at Indy, I got out of the car, I could have done a whole nother race. Like, and I looked at like Garrett, he was pretty whooped, and like you could see it in like a lot of their faces, just pouring sweat off of them. And I'm standing around like, I'll go again. And I'll be 43 years old tomorrow, so it's like I'm not one of the younger guys in the field. And there's guys that
I was
are my
pretty
age
beat up
or
in Indy
older.
too, but that was also, there wasn't many cautions in Indy.
Yeah.
So there wasn't like that like quick downtime where you can kind of stretch out your shoulders a little bit. It was like a lot of racing.
Yep, and it was pretty intense too, because I started at the back there and had to come all the way through to the front, and it was.
That's funny. I started at the front and had to go all the way to the back.
we swapped places. But like that was that track is so flat. Like it was a lot of work, like to really do well there and manage the tires, and I think that's where I had an advantage. Like in the early races that I was doing, like tire management and being able to feel when the tire was sliding, and then like, Deegan came in and won a couple of races managing the tires well, and now the Hunt the Front guys have come in and done really well, and I think those guys are actually up in North Florida. Like I want to go hang out with them at some point.
Yeah, they seem really cool. We talked a little bit, and my thought was like if they do a race like a 2.4 where you switch drivers, just separate them maybe.
Oh yeah, put them on different teams.
Yeah, put them on different teams.
Yeah.
Give them a little bit of a challenge. Just because like, if you win a couple times, you should get a little penalty. Almost.
Maybe. That's one way to think of it.
If you win Ultra Street 3 times, you're getting weight.
You're getting weight added. That's for sure.
John Sears is foaming at the mouth to put some weight on a car.
Man, and tell you what, for as far as like a job I would not want in the racing world is the rule guy, because everybody hates the rule guy.
Yep.
And like John's a great dude. We'll hang out with him. We'll probably see him at PRI and stuff. But like for as long as he's stuck with the X275 rules and Ultra Street and all that other stuff and the crap that he's had to put up with, because everybody's complaining. The guy at the front doesn't want to get weight. The guy at the back doesn't understand why he's so slow, even though he might just not be working his program as hard as the guy at the front that's putting pistons in it every weekend. Like it's a tough game to walk, and like the more rules you make to try and keep the field tighter, you just make people spend more to have every advantage they can get within that rule set.
And car count goes down.
Yep.
When rule count goes up.
Yep.
It's just inevitable. There's going to be less people because when I was talking to Joe at Fast Forward, he was like, I won't show up to a race unless I can win.
Yep.
And that's not a mentality I have. I've shown up to plenty of races because I enjoy it. Like I know I'm not going to win. Like you beat me in Indy. That was a bad deal for me. But
yeah.
And you won the whole class, and it's just luck of the draw on a chip draw like that. But I'll show up to plenty of classes that I'm not going to win. But there's a lot of people out there that have that mentality, as they should, because they spend a lot of money on a program. So they're not going to lug 1,000 miles to not be a competitive car. So it gets tough when you have those rules where if I'm not going to win, I'm not going to show up. But you can only blame yourself half the time. But then if you ran the same class for 5 years and suddenly now you don't fit in it anymore, some people get a little salty about that.
It's hard because you might have a guy that you might have a similar combination to another guy, and he puts in a bunch more effort, and he ends up at the front of the class. Well, you both get weight. When the guy at the front gets weight and you got the same combination as him, you both just got weight. And so that's hard for some people to understand and roll with. And it's like, well, shoot, that's just part of it. And then, the guy that got the weight that was already a tenth off the pace. Well, he's mad and he knows he can't compete anymore. So he just goes and does something locally or grudge races or, goes and does no prep or something that.
They usually get a side-by-side, sell their car and get a side-by-side or a boat.
Yeah.
Go fishing. That seems like the next step is like.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah.
And it ends up in one of those worlds.
I could see that happening. I know I've looked at side-by-sides, I've looked at boats, and then now I'm on an adventure to get my pilot's license, and now I'm looking at airplanes. Like a friend just sent me an airplane for sale, and I'm like, I'm not ready for that yet.
Well, and then you get a boat, and then you suddenly end up like Finnegan, and you have a 900 cubic inch Sonny's Big Block in your boat.
That thing was scary. Like I rode in that thing.
That thing looks scary. Just sitting still, I'm like, that's a scary vehicle.
Yeah, which he's taken that engine out now and is putting it in to. Actually, he took the turbos off of it, and it was going to go in a car, but now he's putting I think it's only a 700 and only.
Yeah.
I think it's a 711 cubic inch, but it's a semi-Hemi. Like it's a Chevrolet with hemispherical heads on it or semi.
The cylinder heads are like 2 foot by 4 foot square.
They are
blocks.
large, but he's going to run. So he's got an all carbon fiber eliminator hull, I think it is. But he's been running it out in California and Arizona and stuff, and it's an all carbon fiber tunnel jet boat. I'm like, man, that is sweet.
He's great because he just does his own thing.
Yeah.
Like we all kind of get caught up in this same like world almost a little bit, and like the same kind of drag racings and stuff like that, the burnout stuff, and he's just like on his own path out here.
Yeah, I was actually talking to him the other day. He's possibly coming to the Christmas tree race. I don't want to spoil the surprise, but he broke something in the transmission, and they're trying to get that fixed, and he wants to test before next year. And I'm like, well, as late as you're talking about, you're gonna maybe catch a Gainesville track that's open, or you can for sure make the run all the way to Bradenton because he's up near Atlanta.
He's not too far.
No, he's basically I think 5.5 hours from my front door in Gainesville, which puts him 8.5 hours to come down to here. So it's a day of driving either way.
Yeah,
but
probably leave the car down here maybe too. Maybe he knows a guy.
Yeah,
but I'm sure that thing will break. Not knocking him, but it does break. Often.
He's made some changes to get it better, but now
we're talking about blasphemy at that point.
Yeah. So he just put a T56 in it instead of the old style 4-speed.
That's good because that was a problem with the 4-speed was it misshifted.
Well,
because he did something wrong.
Well, they hooked a lever up wrong.
Yeah,
so it was starting in second, and then when they would make the 1-2 shift, it was actually the 2-1 shift. And he money shifted it
Honda guy
5 times in a row, and they didn't he was moving the lever from 1 to 2, but the lever was the rod under the floor was on backwards to the bracket, or not the bracket, but the linkage that it was supposed to be hooked to. So literally, when he would pull what he thought was first to second, it was literally going from second to first, and money shifted it. I think 5 times in a row.
His drag week video that he had with that car.
Oh yeah, they had.
If anybody watched it, that that video should just be titled like Perseverance.
Yeah.
Because at like 10 times in the video I was watching, I was like, just go home, just stop, please. I can't watch this anymore. And like,
Yeah.
more power to him. He just powered through the pain.
Yep. Yeah. Him and Tony Angelo,
yeah.
like, man, they were hustling that week. And I'm like, golly, what point is it not fun? Because watching the video, I wouldn't think that would be fun anymore. But that's I think that's also his escape because of him. And I'm speaking for him a little bit here, but like with the Motor Trend TV show stuff, like they might be wrapped up in say one episode might be a week to film, when like he does so many of those through the year, like to go just get to hang out with no pressure, like on a drag and drive event. Okay, you're working on the motor. Well, I'm working on the motor with my buddies. Like, so I could see it from that perspective of it being still enjoyable. But
There was a point though where I think he pulled the motor out of another car and tried to use it. And like,
yeah, they pulled the motor out of Freiberger's car. And
worth watching if you haven't seen that.
Lots and lots of work. And for us, if like we did change the transmission in Soccer Mom this year at Sick Week, but literally we were driving right by my shop too. So that was part of the factor. Like if we were on, say, Sick Summer or one of those events up out of town, we could probably still fix the transmission, but if we hurt something motor-wise, like we're packing it up, and probably unless we're running for the win, which Soccer Mom doesn't fit even the class in that we race in Sick Week, which I think was Super Street. Like Eric Yost, he rolled in there with a car that was legal to go faster than 750, and so he was the only one that was legal, and others of us could have gone maybe closer to as fast as he was going. Like I think he clipped off a high 730.
Yeah. And you're talking cage legal because on Sick Week, they're very cage focused, where other street car events you can kind of slide by.
Yeah.
You know,
you can.
You know, there's
like
some
some
haziness. It's not NHRA sanctioned, most of the racing we do. But then Sick Week is very to the book on that stuff. So
like at Indy, I went a 745 in testing, and being that Indy is an NHRA track, I took a little bit out of it to try and go between 750 and 755 every run, and managed to do it. I thought actually on the run against you, it threw the alternator belt off of it and sawed the fuel line in half, and I kind of thought I was done, and ran over to the guys at Motion and got some hoses and had this big loop from the fuel pump up to the fuel rail and made it work for they were calling like repeatedly over the intercom, Kevin Smith, get to the lanes. And I'm like, I don't know if I'm going to make it or not. But we pulled up there and it threw the belt again in the semis. And so going into the finals, I just put it on the battery charger and the battery was almost dead. And I don't know if that contributed to it hurting itself, but making 3 really hard runs within 45 minutes, like I think that probably didn't help anything. That's a lot of hot
lapping for a car like that.
Yeah.
That's a lot. Like when I saw that, I was kind of okay with being out. I was like, I'm not trying to hot lap
It got to be work
like
there at the end.
But like, I just don't want to do that to my car. It's too abusive on it. It just is. Like, yes, it's a street car, but you can't just do 4 pulls in 45 minutes. Like it needs time. I was actually happy to wheelie in that deal because a lot of people liked that, and I kept saying like, "Oh, I would have had him too if it wasn't for them." I was able to use it as an excuse.
I think you said something like, he could have gone 720s, and I was like, "No, I'm not. That car won't go 720s. Not at least with the heavyweight like it was then." But like it was, I thought I had you covered there, but I knew you had the potential because you had been 760s before. I'm like, if he puts a killer run together, we're going to be really close. And so I did my thing, and I kind of saw you wheelie out of the corner of my eye, and I was like, okay, I got him. And I think I lifted early on that run just because I think
it only went like 148 or something like that. It wasn't, didn't have a lot of mile an hour.
I could see you in the mirror, and I was like, okay, I can lift. And plus, like, what happens, too, when you're turning the car around, and, like, those events, like, they turn you around quick. Well, you got to pack parachute. You got to put fuel back in the car. You got to kind of try and cool it off without completely draining the battery down to nothing. Like all these things factored in, and like James went into the final there, and I think he had a bye, so he just rolls the beams, backs back up, and his car's just sitting there, cooled down, and not really having to be near as like everything was heat soaked in mine, and like the battery was dead, and I was hoping the thing would make it to the finish line still running. And I mean, we had us a really good race in the finals, but
him getting the bye, I think he was in the what was it, the Godzilla deal at the time, right? That car would have probably been really hot.
Yep.
So like, if he had to run that pass,
with it too,
like it would have been really hot, and it would have been a really tough race for him to try to hot lap that thing.
Yep. But also with it being, we're a part of the show for the crowd, like, and with there only being the one class, like we've got to turn around quick. Otherwise, people in the stands are getting bored. Like they don't come back to the next one. Like there's all these things. Like I completely understand the need to turn around fast. But as the guy that owns and builds the car, I'm like, oh, this is going to be rough. And then we ended up getting a head gasket there in the finals. And
I'm pretty sure James did too.
They might have.
I think that Godzilla motor pretty much was a head gasket deleter.
Yep.
Pretty efficiently.
Yep. Yeah, he got a few through its adventures, and I mean it's cool to see what that car's doing now. Like
Coyotes are just so good.
That thing sounds so good. Like the RPM, and I mean, and Brett's car is the same way. Like they sound so good from the top end of the track, just the RPM that they buzz them. And
when you can give a Coyote some gears, they really like it.
Yep.
They really like holding that RPM like that.
So with the smaller engines, I think it goes back to you have to maximize to keep the car in an extremely small RPM window.
Yeah.
So you need multiple gears to keep it there and a lockup. You almost use the lockup kind of like a fourth gear in the car.
Well, if you're really fancy, you can use it as a 1, 2,
I think
3, 4, 5 gears.
Well, I think what it sounded like Brett was doing on one run, it sounded like he locked it in second gear. And then the car didn't make enough torque to knock the tire off to spin the tire on the shift. Or like I think if Garrett tried to lock up Mullet in second gear, it's got so much torque that when it makes the gear change, it's going to spin the tire to the point where it won't reel itself back in.
And we talked about this in your car, in Soccer Mom, the same way. Like we both would really gain from a turbo 400, close ratio.
Probably would.
I wouldn't really be able to use a lockup efficiently. I would just kick the crank out of the car. But
it's hard on a motor.
Especially a really small stock block deal like that. It's super hard on things. You can really screw up a lockup pretty easily, but we would both benefit a lot from a
3-speed.
Yeah.
Which my Cutlass, I've actually bought a 3-speed for my Cutlass. I got a reed case, and it's like a 184, 140 geared turbo 400, and it's a $12,000 transmission, and I'm like,
no converter.
Yeah, that's no converter.
That's no converter.
That's literally the bell housing and the
dump
transmission.
Valves,
It does have. It's got an internal and an external dump on it. So, but no lockup. No, I mean the lockup adds another 10.
Yeah.
And for my budget, like it's gonna do, and my car is gonna be kind of a similar deal, like a drag and drive deal, not really a class specific car. I'm gonna build the chassis because I started over completely with the chassis. And I'm going to build the chassis where we could put a big block in it eventually, which the car's an Oldsmobile Cutlass. And I'm a big Oldsmobile guy from way back in the day on the internet forums.
Could put one of them those fancy LT1s from an Oldsmobile, from your Roadmaster, your Buick Roadmaster.
Yeah, like what Grubworm's got.
Yeah.
But like there's actually an Oldsmobile V8 engine. There's a couple of different ones. There's a big block and a small block. And my deal is going to be a 385 cubic inch small block. Then it's built with a really short stroke, a huge bore to turn, with my engine builder that I worked with on it, like arguably the best Oldsmobile engine builder, which is Bill Travato up in New York. We built the thing with a target shift point of like 9,200. Like, cause it's a 3.5 inch stroke, which is even shorter than a factory 5.3 LS. And we've turned Soccer Mom, like I said, 92. It's not making any power up there because it's got a really small intake port and small intake valve because the bore is really small. Like Soccer Mom's stock block combo was a 3.800 on the bore. Well, my Oldsmobile engine is a 4.18 on the bore, like massively bigger bore. Yeah. So then you can get the bigger valve, and then the bigger valve will support a bigger port. So all of that stuff works together to hopefully get something that's going to make really good power from like 7 to 9,200. We'll see. I've had the thing a year. I need to actually build the car to go with it. It's like I've been accumulating all these parts through the years. Yeah. And my primary focus, which I've said on my channel and I'll say here, like I'm a shop owner first. Like I have to do things that keep my guys busy in the shop, keep us all paid. And the YouTube stuff is it's great for the shop in that it does bring us some extra business. We get a little bit of merch sales. There's a little bit of revenue that comes in through views on YouTube.
Some part sales.
Yep. We sell some extra parts through our website and stuff like that. And it works out well that, the YouTube has helped the shop, but if YouTube goes away, my shop is still going to keep going. Mm-hmm. And I just came off of like a almost 2-month break from YouTube. Well, we've had a really good run in the shop at this point, because instead of me being worried about what I'm focusing on to do the next YouTube video, I'm focusing on, okay, well, what's the job that we can, we need to turn through jobs the best we can and as quickly as we can to keep bringing in income for the shop. And here recently, my business partner and I decided that it would be worth it to bring on someone to actually help me edit YouTube videos, or even just do the clips or the Facebook Reels or TikToks or something like that, because I got to the point where YouTube, for me, I felt like I was suffering some because I wasn't everywhere. Like I was only YouTube. And then like we did a couple of TikTok videos and it was cool, but I feel like you almost, if you're going to be in the social media space, you've got to be in pretty much all of them to keep the momentum and the channel growing. And that's kind of where I'm at right now. Is I'm still editing YouTube videos, but I've also got a guy helping edit some of the longer edits, like the Bristol 1000 race, for example. He's helping me with that one. We've got 4 hours of footage to sift through. And like some of that's just caution. So you got to go through, and you still have to put a massive amount of time in that initial run through of all the footage. You almost have to spend 4 hours watching it, because you got to be like, well, that 30 seconds wasn't any good, or this 5 minutes wasn't any good. Where if I go into the shop and I pre-plan out kind of like a video, I might have an hour of footage. And like, with this, you're not going to have a whole lot of editing with a podcast. You just chuck it up.
Pretty much just cut first beginning and end off. And that's pretty much it.
Yep. Where with and you've got your other channel too, your YouTube stuff, you get both sides of it, where you've got to do all the editing and put in the effort, and you have a few duds of a video and you're like, well, I just put 6 hours into that and I made $80.
But that's changing as well, because when you started, and I've been doing it a while, I've been around this space, but there was a lot less competition, a lot less for people to watch. But now almost like you can't just film whatever, because there's so much competition that you really have to film like Weston Champlin. His stuff is really top tier, but he films very sparsely, and he posts like not as many videos. Like Whistling Diesel, same way, doesn't post a lot of videos. Yep. Garrett's a rare example. He's not the rule. He's the
exception to
the rule. But like a lot of people are scaling down amount of videos and scaling up individual production quality. And I think that's the important thing going forward a little bit here.
Yeah, and that's kind of where I'm at right now, and being kind of like, I always feel like I can learn from other people. And when you're around a bunch of people or in the same space as some people, like I look to the people who are having the most success at it. I've talked with Garrett about some of the stuff that he does. And then outside of talking to him, I've done my own research with, like Mr. Beast is on, you could argue he's the biggest and the baddest YouTuber ever. And one of his things is spend more time putting out one really good video versus 10 mediocre videos. He's like, you're much more likely to have success with a viral video with one video you put a whole lot of effort into versus a bunch of videos. Now, I kind of go both ways with like, I like having small updates and keeping people, kind of bringing people along for the adventure. And I realize one of the realizations that I've come to with my channel is there's so many people that are invested in just they're invested in us as a shop. And when I take a bunch of time off, they start sending messages to the shop. Is everything okay? We miss you guys. And I'm like, okay, I kind of feel like I owe these people to keep bringing them content. And there's a certain pressure that comes with that because, something goes sideways while you're filming. You blow something up and then you're waiting a couple of days on parts, and then the video doesn't flow well because you started on Monday and then now you're trying to finish it on Friday, and like just everything's off and that kind of stuff. It makes it to where it's hard to, I feel like, put a good video together. And that's probably the difference between where like I'm at and where like Garrett's at. Garrett's doing videos, like he'll come up with an idea and it's a great video. Where me, I'm kind of filming what we're doing in the shop, or with maybe the occasional video that's just for YouTube. Like I've got a couple of ideas for videos I'm going to do here in December that are going to be outside of my normal stuff, and it's trying to reach that broader audience of people that
like a standalone video as well, like a video series where it's like building my car episode 20 is going to be tough going forward, I think, on YouTube. But like building my car 45-minute episode of the whole start to finish. It was a roller, now it's at the track. I think that'll be what more captures. It also captures new people, because a new person that finds your channel is not going to be like, what do I start watching episode 1 of a 20-part series? That seems like a lot. That's like you're picking up a big thing there.
And that's what really built my channel initially, was building Mullet. I mean, got me over 200,000 subscribers, and then like every video would go 100,000 views pretty much, and was great. And then I'm probably now to where one of my average videos is 40 to 50,000 views. And I'm good with that. And I kind of plan to do that build series, but then also at the end, I'm going to do a condensed down version, kind of like what Taylor Ray does.
Yeah, because it gets new people in the door. That's the tough part. Like, you need a video that will get new people in the door, because if you just keep going to your same audience, eventually they will probably forget or something along those lines. Or they may
get bored with what you're doing. And that's the thing that...
Yeah, Taylor Ray's a great example too. He has a unique style. His Corvette build was a long series, very well thought out. Very good views, great video series.
And I've noticed, and he and I have talked too, like for us as the guy in front of the camera, as the automotive enthusiast, we kind of have this thought that like when we take the thing to the track, that's where the big video, the views are going to be coming from. That's where we have the most fun. That's the most exciting. That's the most on the edge. But like his drift videos don't do great. Like my racing videos typically don't do great. Like we go out and play at the Firm up there outside of Gainesville, a little local road course track, and we have a great time. Eddie and I are out there, like we'll swap cars and we try to have the best lap time in each car. I feel like the footage is really good, kind of like my Trans Am videos. Like when I've got onboard videos of Lee and the Viper in a crowd of cars, and like they'll go like 20,000 views. And I'm like, man, that was so much work. I love watching this, but like the people that are on YouTube don't really like that.
I have a theory that people want you to use your cars. Like they'll be mad if like you built a car and like it just parked it. Like, oh, you built a purpose-built drag car and you just parked it. They want you to use it, but they don't actually care to watch you use it.
Now
they would be mad. They would comment like angry if you didn't use it. But then if you like, they don't care about the video. I watch Adam LZ, I watch Taylor Ray, but like the drifting videos don't excite me. I'd rather see them just like shop stuff and build stuff and like car talk.
Now, I think the exception might be Garrett, because
he's the exception to rules across the board, though.
Yeah, because like he brings Mullet back out, or whatever they're doing to Ruby, when they bring Ruby back out, like it's going to be a massive video.
But then some of his other stuff still gets better views. Like a jet boat video may get better views, or an airplane video, helicopter, whatever it is. Like it may get better views than like building a drag car and going for sixes and. It's tough, because I wonder that too. I'm like, how many times can you go for the 6-second goal before it gets repetitive?
That's not going to happen. Like, But when you've got people that are along for the story, they want to see all the attempts. And that's the part where,
the attempts get less and less, though.
Yeah.
As you get more successful. Like when we started, the attempts for 6s were endless.
Yep.
There was endless. Now it's almost like, all right, well, I guess you just buy the best part, and then you go for it. You talk to the right people, you get the right converter, things happen
You know
quick.
what to do. Like you look at like the Leroy adventure where it was, completely stock car just with no body, and then he's doing goofy stuff with it, and that builds this massive audience. And I wonder if you added up all of the views and the subscribers that came from Leroy and that journey to get to the 6s now, and then like, well, I could say more, it was the journey to the 7s initially, and it was a huge video to go 7s and all this other stuff. And then like we build mullet, and the first time at the track, we went a 9, lifting at the 8th mile. We went an 8, lifting at the 1,000 foot. And then we went a 790 on the first full rip of the car. And it was like, yeah, well, that's it. Like, now it's the adventure to try and make the car go start nibbling away and eventually go 6s.
Well, and the flip side of that, too, is like, if you drag it out, then everybody that really knows is like, why is it so... Like, you know what I mean? Because, like, if mullet didn't go 790s on like, the first few outings, you would have been like, well... What are they doing wrong?
Well, yeah, why are they not? I mean, and my car's going to be kind of in the same boat because with all I know and how I'm building the car, like if I can't go out, even with an Oldsmobile engine in it, like the goal for the car is kind of the fastest Oldsmobile powered door car.
If it makes 1,800 horsepower.
Why isn't it running 750s or better?
Exactly.
Yep. And that's where I'm going to be. I won't have this adventure, even though back in the early 2000s, I bracket raced the car and it ran 11s on motor and would run 10s on nitrous. But I didn't have none of that on. That was way before YouTube's, or at least way before I was ever participating.
Because when you put all those parts in a car, and if it didn't go that, like everybody would be like,
"You're an idiot. What are you doing?"
Yeah, you're doing something wrong. And then you have sponsors too, and you're not really fulfilling your obligation there in a way because you're not using their parts to the potential that they should be shown and used at.
Yep.
No sponsor wants to see their 1,800 horsepower engine going 950s.
Yep.
It's not a good showing.
Yep. And that's a whole nother thing that people don't think about. Like when somebody comes to you and wants you to use and run their product, and like you want to represent that product well. Like you don't want to, I'm big in with the Holly guys, and like I enjoy the product and want to always put the product in a good light, even though we've had some stuff occasionally where we're like, what the heck? What just happened there? Like
that ECU bricked?
Yeah, and sometimes that's the fault of the person trying to do an update, but there's other times where, I could say the case for like the snipers, which is like a very entry level kit. They can be made to run really well, but they had their quirks about them, and that you had to do some extra shielding on some cars, and you got somebody that buys a sniper and they put it on with their old spark plug wires that they've run forever with their carburetor and their MSD 6A box. And now you put something with some sensitive electronics right on top of the engine, right next to the distributor and right next to these old spark plug wires that are shedding all kinds of radio frequencies that you can't see. And the sniper is running weird. You could argue that it's maybe that it should have been built with more shielding, which is where the Sniper 2 has come in now. But like the initial snipers, you got some combinations they ran great on because the car didn't create more problems. Now then you would get them on some cars, and I had some come through my shop where you'd be cruising and all of a sudden something weird had happened and it'd dump a bunch of fuel in it, and you're like, oh shoot, okay, it lost the RPM sync here for a second, so now it's going through this other part of the map. Like it's restarting and it's flooding the thing with fuel, and then it smokes the O2 sensor. And
my neighbor has one on his Fox body, and it's like nobody wants to mess with it. Nobody wants to tune on it. It's still factory motor Fox body deal with a sniper.
Put a sniper on? He could have put a multi-port on it. But
it's like parts from 10 years ago or 8 years ago.
Gotcha.
That finally like ran last year.
Gotcha.
And nobody wants to mess with it. It's all old stuff, and it's just a nightmare. I've tried to mess with it as much as possible. He knows it's a nightmare. I mean, it broke the the distributor gear the other day. Like it's
Yep.
just tearing stuff up.
Ford stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
Ford stuff.
I've had to pull it home before with my truck.
I think that's the neighbor I knew from Gainesville, right?
Yeah.
Yep. I can't remember his name, but
It's
yeah.
a cool little car. Like it, it should be nice. It should be like what he thought he was getting and how he thought it would all work should be great. He's like, oh, I'm adding EFI to this deal. Like I'm adding like a modern EFI system. And it's just tough.
Yeah, and the Fords are the worst with the snipers because the distributor's at the front and the EFI ECU, I guess you could say, is on the front side of the sniper. So like they're talking right there to each other, and you get some weird signals, and the EFI freaks out, and you have to build some kind of shield to shield the sniper from the EFI. And I've had to build a few shields, and then you run you build it out of aluminum and run the ground to the block or right directly to the battery to absorb the RFI and dump it right back to the battery.
See, that's so much though. Like the average consumer's not gonna figure that out. Like,
that's where they really got a bad rap, because the whole self-tuning line that they promote so much, does it self-tune? Sure.
Get your little thing out there with your pen and your stylus and you start.
Yep. Does it optimize your tune? No.
Well, the Dale truck had one originally.
Yeah.
And it worked great. I mean, all things considered, it did when it was the LS1 T56. Like, it was a good running car.
Yep. And then put the big motor in it with the multi-port on it. And actually, I don't know if that thing's been together a while.
Yeah.
Like, as I did a bunch of work to it. And then since then, I think it's just been basically just putting more nitrous on it and playing with the tune. Like,
I don't think it's really done much in a long time. I think the last time I saw it was like a pace car, like a year ago or 2 years
Bristol.
ago.
Yep, they used it for the pace car or pace truck at Bristol.
It's kind of one of those cars, like, what do you do with it, It was
a big part of the channel, Garrett's channel. And then, like, I know he knocked the quarter panel off of it somewhere at Indy or something, the first Indy Cleetuson cars.
Yeah, that was way back, but it was only kind of like a fender bender deal. It wasn't too bad.
I remember him telling me something like he had more money than he wanted to have in it and fixing it to get it back. And the truck's kind of got like a weathered look to it, I guess you could say. Like the stickers are all they're not shiny and perfect and everything. And I think that fits the look of that thing really well. Mm-hmm. So if you knock one corner off of it, well, now it's going to have fresh decals and fresh paint and all that other stuff. And that doesn't really fit the look of the car.
I backed into the corner of it.
Did you really?
Yeah. Well, in my defense, I had my PT Cruiser that was a demo car, and he had the Dale truck, and we were doing a tug of war.
Oh, okay.
And the PT Cruiser was pulling the truck because it was wet.
Oh, okay.
So I was
Had
pulling the
slicks on
truck,
it.
and I was like, this doesn't look good. So I dropped it into neutral, and I just let off everything. And it just rolled back. And it just kind of like crunched it like a little bit. It wasn't like detrimental or anything.
I thought he got the wall with it at that same event, but maybe not. You were there.
Maybe it hit something else at some point after that because it wasn't a huge deal.
Gotcha.
It was
bender-ish.
Fairly crunched in on one like taillight basically.
Gotcha.
Taillight.
Yeah. The
but
sticker.
It wasn't like horrible, but yeah, it was me that backed into it with a PT Cruiser.
See, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I wasn't at that event.
I'm sure most people don't know it. It wasn't really talked about very much. It was kind of just like whatever, but I can own up to my mistake.
Own up to things years down the road.
Exactly. It's not like somebody in a freaking cater tot that still hasn't owned up to who rolled it.
I heard some stories about that.
And the guy who rolled it doesn't care.
Yeah.
He would fully tell the world.
Well, and that's...
But it's not my place to tell who rolled it.
Yep. And I remember talking to Jeremy about that a little bit. And I think a lot of it was, the realization that we just dodged a bullet. Everybody could have gotten hurt. And it was kind of like a reality check of, okay, we need to be wearing helmets and we need to be seat belted in better. And I mean, that was what, 2-3 years ago that happened?
Probably almost 3 years ago.
Yeah, it's actually,
It's been a while.
It's been a long while. Maybe longer than that.
Yeah, because I think it was right along the same time that I stopped working there because that was like the assumption like I wasn't part of it anymore because I rolled Jeremy's car. However, that would work.
Yeah.
somehow you know the internet. It's fun. I like leaving things up to speculation.
The internet can certainly get fired up about some stuff.
The speculation's almost more fun than telling what happened.
Yeah, and I tell you now, like I watch some of the comments and some of Garrett's fans or Cletus's fans are the wildest. Like there was somebody, I'll just use this as an example, not to poke at the person, but I think the comment was when he was at World Cup that he was going to have a shot at the drag radial record. And I'm like, no. Like as much as he's my boy and like I love that I'm a part of Mullet, like that car I don't think could ever have a shot without a complete rebuild.
Yeah.
Like
not anything against Garrett. It's just a logistical assessment on everything going on.
I want to say the radial quarter mile record is in the 5.
It's an F body.
70s.
It's a black
60s.
F body as well.
Is it?
Yeah. It's Mark Benson Jr. went 55, 65, I think it was.
I remember a Mustang at World Cup went really fast. That was a 275 record.
Yeah.
So the 275 record, I want to say, was in the 570s or 80s.
Yeah, it was the black F-body conventional headed big block with twin whatever size turbos. They're not small, but they didn't look like anything fancy on there.
Yeah, that's just wild. That and you know, a few people kind of got in, and I don't know if I interjected in that, but I might have said something about, no, that's not realistic. And it's just people not knowing how much that it takes to make that next step. Like it's the distance in going from, let's say 950 to 9 flat is basically like going from 650 to 648. Like that, maybe not even, maybe 650 to 649 when it takes the power that it takes. Like it's an exponential curve of the power that it takes because the tire can only accelerate so hard. So basically what you're doing is you're extending the length of time that you are right on the edge of spinning the tire. Like with our cars, we're on the edge of spinning the tire for 60 feet maybe. Probably more like 30 or 40 feet, honestly. But like Mullet is on the edge of spinning the tire as we've seen, you know, for that first 2 seconds now. Like it might spin on the gear change. Yeah. Where these super fast outlaw drag radial or radial versus the world cars, they're literally increasing the power level all the way to the finish line. And that's just so they can maintain that 3.5, 3 Gs or whatever it is that they've kind of figured out is the peak. Like I know Soccer Mom's peak G has been, I think, 2.6 on our G meter. Mm-hmm. When there can be some discrepancy there, but you know, maybe to look at the G, the average acceleration G for, you know, these really fast cars, they're just okay. Well, we can put that 2.5 G all the way, or let's say it's 3 G all the way through the 60 foot. Well, now those guys can run it all the way to 600 feet down the track, where they're still pulling that 3 Gs all the way to the finish line, and that's just like a top fuel car too. It's pulling super hard all the way to the finish line where we can't do that.
It's funny you also talk about, I find that people that really understand, I'm not one of them, but I talk to a lot of people, and the more you understand about all this, the more you start talking about G-forces when you're tuning.
Yep.
Less you start talking about like everything else, you're more talking like G's, because my transmission builder's the same way. Jason at ATF, when we're talking about cars accelerating, he's only talking about the G-force meter. He's not looking at drive shaft curve as much and like traction control stuff. He's just talking about, is it holding peak G's? If he sees it drop peak G's, he's like, you're locking up too early.
Yep.
You're locking up too late. Like he's talking about that kind of stuff. And it's really interesting to hear him and you talk about G-forces. And I'm sure if I talked to Pete longer, he'd be in the same boat. Well,
right off the bat, a G-meter will tell you where your shift point is or where your shift point should be.
Yeah.
Like so many people, they rev the thing out to 8,500 and they should have made the shift back at 7,500. Like when you make the shift and the G goes back up, like you should have shifted earlier, because anytime the G falls, like Jason's talking about, you're not accelerating as hard as you could be. So, and the acceleration G is telling you nothing more that like you keep that average number higher, the car is going to accelerate and cover more distance in a shorter period of time.
He was telling me about like fights he's had with lockup, like on the lockup stuff with no time guys. He's like, you have to lock up later. you're watching your G meter drop, like,
Yep.
and they're like, no, it can't be, like, I'm locking up like early.
Oh, and they
And he's,
might
like,
feel that
arguing with
initial
them.
hit of the lockup, and then and the G meter falls, and then like but they get in your head as the driver. You're like, oh, I feel that thing really hit when I engage the lockup. Well, but okay, it hits hard, but then that next 0.3 of a second it falls because it pulls your RPM down so low. Like all of that stuff factors in. I mean, we use the G force on the road course track. So now on a road course, not only are we worried about acceleration G, we're worried about braking, like deceleration G. And then as you're rolling a car into a corner, you actually come off the brake. So you stand a car on its nose, I'll say, when you're doing a road race stuff. So you put all the weight on the front tires or as much as you can. And then you want that car to be decelerating as hard as it can to the point where you're actually then rolling off the brake a little bit and slowly so that the weight is still shifted forward and you have extra traction on the front tires so that you can then turn the car into the corner. And that's where a lot of people, they just go down, they brake in a straight line, they let off the brake and they turn.
Yeah.
That's not how to go around a road course fast. You have to actually stand the car up on its nose. And if you're using 100% of the traction available for the tire to brake the car, well, it can't turn. You can only achieve so much traction with a tire. So there's some guys you'll see on YouTube that use a pie chart. So if 100% of the pie is being used to stop the car, well, it can't turn. So then you have to bleed off the brakes to get some available traction. And the guys that do it really well, like when the car transitions from deceleration G to now lateral G where it's turning, like that G, the combined G force comes up and then it doesn't start decreasing until they're like at the midpoint of the corner. Like they can stand the car on its nose for the entire brake zone, bend it in towards the apex and like maintain that same level of G force. And it's just like, that's really impressive when you see a driver that can do
that's
that.
why go-karts teach you all those fundamentals so well, because you are that pivot point in the chassis in a way. You're like the stiffening of it. So you feel everything, like you're pushing the wheel down to actually plant the front end at points. Like you're...
There's lots of little tricks in go-karts, and I'm actually terrible on a go-kart. Like if it's a go-kart that only has rear brakes, because I'm so used to in the street tire road race stuff that I play around with, like we trail brake. So we brake all the way towards the apex of the corner. And then as you're approaching the apex, you're rolling off the brake and rolling back into the throttle to then accelerate out of the corner.
Interesting.
And I try to do that in a go-kart. And like the first 3 or 4 laps in a go-kart, I'm spinning out like once or twice a lap. So at least when I'm on kill and not using my brain, like usually what happens is you slow down a little bit and you go faster on the stopwatch because you're smooth and you're under control instead of just bonsai in the corner and half spinning out. And now you're sideways scrubbing speed. And then in a go-kart, you bog it down. Well, you just ruined your whole next straightaway. So like I'm excited to go do the sick week go-kart race at PRI this week again, or next week. But like it's a lot of that type of management. And like it's funny because like my road race car that I have is like it's probably a $15,000 to $20,000 investment in parts, and then plus all the labor. You know, I'll just use parts because that's what most people if they're going to build one themselves.
Yeah, that's all that matters.
And then like when we put that $20,000 into a car, you take it out to the road course track and you're literally in the car for 30 minutes at a time, like at the limit. Like if you're driving it well, you've got an adrenaline rush for 30 minutes.
Well, them 2Js are good.
Yeah, that's what's in my road race car.
That's what I mean, man. Them 2Js love it.
Yep. But you take that same $20,000 investment in a drag car, and then you make it a $80,000 investment in your drag car. Well, you just spent $60,000 to spend less time in your race car on the actual racetrack. Now, there still is no substitute for the acceleration forces we get to feel in a drag car. It's awesome. But I have as much fun on the road course track or on the circle track with the Ranger or the Crown Vic.
Or you go spectator drags and wad up your daily.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't my daily, but there's been some people who put their dailies in the wall.
Yeah,
out
not
there
you,
too,
I meant, but like in general, those spectator drags for the most part are like somebody's daily driver.
Yeah, and that's what the thrill is for the fans, though. Well, somebody might, as much as we don't like to admit it as
Cold
motorsports
tires.
Participants, the carnage is really what the fans like to see. I mean, yeah, we don't want anybody to get hurt. We don't want anybody to ruin their stuff, but a spin out is exciting, or, heaven forbid somebody piles one in the fence. It's at least something to talk about and exciting for, you see that guy scuff the wall with a Ferrari or something like that.
Like NASCAR, that's what people watch for.
It's sad but true. I mean, I watch NASCAR, but I only watch really the highlight reel on YouTube after the race. Yeah. I don't have the time to spend 3 hours devoting to watching a NASCAR race on a Sunday afternoon.
I just follow Alex Bowman because he's my guy.
Yep, same. Yeah, I'm interested in his career, Corey LaJoie, and I just blanked on who else I watch. But there's a couple of guys. I mean, I kind of pay attention to kind of like, I know who's who and all that other stuff. I mean, I watch Formula One racing too. Same deal. I watch the highlight. I watch the highlight reel.
They're quick races though too. Yeah. That's where I think Formula One captures people a lot. Is the racing is pretty quick.
Yep.
It's also random times though. It'll be like midnight.
It's because it's a global sport. Like that's the F1 race in Vegas started I think at 1 o'clock in the morning because that's how they looked at it from a global perspective, and they're like, all right, the most people in the world are going to watch if we have it at 1 o'clock in the morning Vegas time.
Yeah, which in Vegas is fine. It's 24/7 city. It doesn't matter there.
That's true. I really want to go to one of those deals. So
the one in Austin looks cool.
Yeah, so we were at Austin with the Trans Am race right after the weekend after the Formula One race. Yeah. They're still taking down the bleachers.
Texas Motorplex?
Circuit of the Americas.
Circuit of the Americas,
COTA. So we were there the week after, and the crews are there taking down the bleachers, and I'm just looking at, like, I saw the highlights and the videos on YouTube, but then just being there is like, you see the work and the effort they put into the stands and the support structure, and it's like, F1 is the deal. I mean, like, the amount of people that they bring in, and that's why they can spend $1 billion or whatever it was to build a racetrack inside of Las Vegas on the Strip, and it still make money, like, for however they've worked it out that makes money.
Well, and Max Verstappen is such a unbelievable force of nature to watch drive.
He's a machine.
Yeah. And that's why he's paid $50 million a year or something crazy, which is just, for any other racing series, that's like that's like all of drag racing. Like, that's like snowbirds. Like, the whole facility is like a 50. Like,
with all the race teams and all the cars.
The race team, that's like a $50 million deal. Like, you could pay for a whole snowbirds, I feel like.
Well, I forget what. So I think the budget cap for F1 is 140 something million, give or take. Yeah, per team.
Driver, maybe.
So is that for 2 cars? I don't even know.
Yeah.
But like, they also, so there's things that are covered by that 140 million, and it's give or take depending on where you finish in the points. Like, when you finish up towards the front, I think you get less of a budget for the next year.
Yeah, like Red Bull lost like $7 million for next year because they were so
dominant this year.
Yeah.
So, and some people would argue that's not real racing, that you're handicapping the front runners to bring the back of the guys up. But F1 is not just racing; it's also entertainment for the world, and that's why the Netflix show has been so popular. And I think that's really what brought the U.S. market to F1, and it's so wild to think of it. And I think Garrett's really smart in what he's doing with his big events, like the pay-per-view and the Crown Vic races, and moving them around. Like, we're not running Bristol next year because we're going to try a new market to see what the response is there, because not only do you want to go to places where there's a lot of people, you want to go to tracks that fit what we're doing really well. Like, Indy's great. We fill the stands at Indy, and even though we put more people in the stands at Bristol, it didn't look like it.
Yeah, it's impossible.
Because it's a 200,000 seat stadium, where when we go to the Freedom Factory or Indy and there's people everywhere, it looks really good, and subconsciously, I think, gets people excited to participate. where they might see where we go to Bristol and they're like, oh, there's nobody there.
Yeah, I
Must
think
not have
even
been that
Connecticut
great.
is on the list this year.
Yeah, I think Stafford Speedway is somewhere where we're supposed to go next year.
Which is interesting for me because I'm a Northeast guy, so I was like, oh, that's kind of cool. It's not far from my home. Like maybe I'll go back.
Make a little vacation trip and go see the old stomping grounds.
Yeah, bring my race car up there, bring the burnout car up to
there you go.
Somewhere where it's never seen before, and they would all freak out and not know what to do.
Yep, I haven't ever spent a lot of time up there in that area. So I've been to DC a couple of times and went to Rochester where my engine was, and been to Niagara Falls a couple of times. And like the way my life is or has been the last 10 years, pretty much the only traveling I do is for something for work. Like I'm going to Watkins Glen to go to a race. I'm going to Circuit of the Americas to go to a race. I'm going to Mid-Ohio to go to a race. I'm going to Road America way out in Wisconsin to go to a race. My little vacations might be taking the kids down to Disney World or SeaWorld, or we go to the beach for the weekend or something like that, where I want to get to a point where I'm not just running from event to event to event to event when I get to travel, but it's part of the game. Part of the game I'm playing with the business and all this other stuff. So
yeah, I used to deal with that too. People would be like, "Oh my gosh, that's so cool! Like you went to visit so and so." I'm like, "Yeah, I saw the racetrack and like the Walmart."
We got to hit the Walmart to get supplies.
Yeah, I didn't see all that much. Well, dude, this was really fun. Where can people find you at? We'll wrap it up here.
Well, we're on YouTube, KSR Performance and Fabrication. We're going to be more active on Instagram and TikTok and Facebook Reels and stuff. We're on Facebook now with our shop page, but we also have a website, winwithksr.com, where you can get merch and parts. And like we're at that point where we're trying to always be growing the business side of things, but now we're back to also trying to grow our social media presence. And if we're not there, you can always ride by the shop and see us there during normal business hours.
Yeah.
And we've got...
Come by on Sick Week, I'm sure.
Yep. We're going to have a party for Sick Week like we always do. So just hang out, and there's lots of tire smoke that ends up in the air on the roads around the shop, and it's awesome.
Yeah. Well, good deal, man. Also, thank you for being one of the early guests on this deal, because back then it was just a concept, and
we were holding the microphones in our hands and stuff, and like I tell you what, this is awesome. Like, and it's awesome to see you grow it and like find your niche and like see the things growing and the people you're bringing in, and it's like I noticed the views are going up for like all the people you're bringing in.
Views going, Yep. I appreciate it, man. I appreciate the early support. But thank you guys for watching. I'll see you next time.